Am I the asshole for losing it and calling my father a weak, pathetic man in front of his family? Original post, August 18, 2024. My father has always been against any confrontation or arguments. He is extremely passive, refuses to stand up for himself, and avoids any conflict. If someone isn't paying attention while walking and bumps into him, he insists it's his own fault. If his employer would mess up his salary, he wouldn't bother fixing it. If a mechanic didn't properly repair his car, he would just accept it as is. This unfortunately resulted in a tumultuous childhood with my insanely narcissistic mother. She controlled his every move. She got him to quit his job and be a locked-in stay-at-home dad. She had him do every chore. She insulted him at every step. She cheated on him relentlessly and even brought APs into our home. She enjoyed making his life miserable every day and he never questioned it. My extended family, God bless them, were there for me so many times as much as they could be. They tried for years to make my father leave but he never budged. When she would direct her anger onto myself, in the form of screaming, insulting or general demeaning, my father never once found the guts to stand up for me or support me. When I was a kid, if I cried to Dad about something Mom did or said to me, he would sweep it under the rug or just insist I forget about it. Hell, he would even try and justify it. As I grew older, it really set in for me how messed up this was. My mother gladly kicked me out of the house when I was 18 and my father just sat there and looked sullen. Didn't say a damn thing. I joined the Air Force almost immediately and got stationed on the other side of the country. The dynamic was awful and I could have easily gone down the incel route if not for therapy and the amazing people I met along the way. It took years for me to get in a better mental space. I was filled with hatred. My mother left my father 2 years after I got stationed and utterly destroyed my father in the divorce. She was killed a year later in a DUI with one of her APs. I took a lot of joy in hearing that it took her hours to die, and that's when I really knew I needed help to process things. I'm almost 30 now, have a girlfriend who is perhaps the best thing to ever happen in my life, and fully understands the situation with my family. I have learned to not allow myself to be consumed with anger and resentment by my past, or so I thought, you'll see. And instead put that energy to my future. I have been extraordinarily low contact / near no contact with my father since I left. As much as I try, I cannot make that connection with him. I recently went to a family reunion and brought my girlfriend with me. My father was there as it was his side of the family. They have many issues with him but he is family, so whatever, I guess. I made sure to avoid him. I was chatting with my uncles when I heard my father talk in the background. He was discussing how a coworker of his was going through a divorce as he discovered his wife was having an affair, and was positioned to have a very favorable divorce on his side. My father remarked how his coworker should work instead to forgive his wife and, by his own words, set a good example for unity and forgiveness. And how he believed he set a great example for me in that extent. I swear it was like a switch went off in my head and I was mentally back to being the rage-filled 18-year-old. All these years and he never learned a damn thing. I turned to him and asked if he was fucking serious. He looked at me and started to stutter. I know the next minute was pure word vomit and I can't relay it perfectly, but to sum it up, I shouted how he was a pathetic father, pathetic man. His family all know he's a disgrace of a human being who would rather his son be treated like shit than defend him because he's a fucking coward. No one would ever see him as an example to live by. His wife would rather fuck half the neighborhood than even touch him, and he should never ever believe anyone respects him. I began to derail and ramble between my shouting and my girlfriend quickly took me out and drove me home. It was insane just how quickly being away from him made me feel better. She just held me when we got back and told me it's okay. Again, the best thing to ever happen to me. I was ashamed of how I lost it and am now going to resume my therapy, that's a given. However, I'm glad I finally unloaded what always needed to be said onto him. Extended family is pretty mixed with reactions. His brothers, my uncles, said it was time for him to hear it from me. My grandparents are pissed I did that in front of the entire extended family, with some saying I should have done that behind closed doors instead of everyone. AITA has no consensus bot. OOP was NTA with a few YTAs. Relevant comments. Comment 1. It sounds like you finally got to express the pent-up feelings you've carried for so long. While the outburst wasn't ideal, it seems like it was a necessary step towards healing. It's good you're resuming therapy to process this further. OOP. Yeah, afterwards it hit me that although it was very cathartic, it definitely wasn't the most appropriate way to handle it, LOL. Comment 2. He sounds like a gentle, kind and well-meaning person. You directed what is very clearly anger and resentment for your mother at him. It's a bit more complicated than being an asshole or not. You seem to have got some catharsis out of it. I just don't believe he is the one you really wanted to scream at, and from the sounds of it he was also a victim of your mother too. And while he was an adult and should have known better, he obviously didn't. Being non-confrontational isn't some character flaw. It's psychological. And he probably needs therapy himself. Screaming at him and demeaning him actually sounds like something your mother probably did/would do, and I worry about you if that is something that actually made you feel better about yourself. OOP. Yes, I fully admit he was a victim of my mother, but he was a victim who had a support system he never wanted to use. He fully let me be a victim my entire childhood because apparently it was too much effort to try, and to this day doesn't believe he needs therapy. Comment 3. All I can say is based on your post, and this interaction is deeply misguided. And you're failing to recognize the truly horrifying thing. You're behaving like the mother you actually should hate. OOP. Oh, trust me, I fully hate her as well, but she is gone, and there is no use in holding a grudge against a dead person. I had hoped though, after his son making him an outsider in his life, his family openly joking face to face about his failings as a father, and his ex-wife draining him for everything he had and making him start over in a one-bedroom apartment, his friends slowly leaving his life one at a time out of embarrassment, that he would have maybe have at least one moment to reflect and maybe consider he should have done things differently. OOP getting therapy due to his past trauma. OOP. Yeah, either way, I need to hop back on the horse for therapy. It'll be good for me. As for my grandparents, I really have had to look back as to how far this pattern of enabling goes back. I know they all did what they could to try and help, but it always seemed like there were times that more active measures could be taken. Times where people should have been far more stern with his addressing his behavior. The older generation on his side are the classical "their family and we stick together no matter what." And I have to think whether his passiveness and enabling is something he picked up on his own or something he learned from his own parents. Update 1. August 20th, 2024, 2 days later. Thanks for the advice and recommendations, even amongst some of the YTA. However, some of them needed to be addressed because they were either hilarious or cringeworthy. Some of them were very angry, and they kind of confused me at first until I saw their comments further down or saw their profile and saw rants about double standards or complete non sequitur ramblings about women. So yeah, not helpful advice, and they were great dark reflections about how I could have turned out if not for the support in my life. Some attempted to portray my dad as a humble, kind, caring, sensitive old man who I'm just being a big bully to. This was a very good insight into how enablers of abuse get away with so much in today's world, because so many people forget how they are part of the abuse themselves. Some were attempting to mentally dissect me or have a gotcha moment with me to pull apart my story. That was generally asinine, and I had to step away from those before they asked for my cranial measurements or something. So it was pretty much immediately when I was up the next morning that I realized I needed to resolve the events of last night. I first spoke to my girlfriend and gave a sincere apology for having her see me like that. She reassured me that nothing was wrong. She'd known me for years and has always known me to be level-headed and understands why I kinda snapped. She herself has a history of dealing with narcissistic families, so she absolutely understands the dynamic. She only really told me that it would be best to work on spending time around my extended family since my father will always be there. I told her, don't worry, I'm immediately going to talk to them afterwards to figure that out. So those parts are fine. Looked kind of like an ass in front of her, but I'm making sure that doesn't happen again. I also informed her of my intentions to resume more therapy just to keep myself steady, which she was happy to hear. I called my grandparents and sincerely apologized as well for putting such a sore dent into their family reunion. That it wasn't appropriate, and while I still feel it felt good to say that to him, it should have been privately and not in front of everyone. I also told them that going forward, as much as I love spending time with them, since the family always hangs out in one group that my father will always be in, for now until I can handle being around him, I need to distance myself occasionally until I feel comfortable interacting. I told them that I am nor would I ever be establishing an ultimatum or demands of them, and that either way I need to step back. I guess during my apology and explanation I was kind of just going on a tangent because my grandfather interrupted me to calm down. He told me that after I left, people kind of separated or slowly started leaving, and they eventually were able to talk to my father one-on-one. I guess seeing me have such a freakout resulted in my grandmother having a mini freakout of her own when she started talking to my father, resulting in her kicking him out. While I have a great relationship with both, my grandmother has always been extra protective of me, so seeing me that way must have set off a fire in her. My grandfather then said that it has become a bit of an open family secret about my father's failing. His brothers taunt him about it and generally don't have a great relationship with him, and for my grandparents it's always just uneasy. But seeing me the other day and how it still affects me so much has really liked it for a lot of people that it was really bad. They began to try and say sorry if they didn't do enough, which I very adamantly retorted that they did more than what anyone could have expected. It was very emotional for a minute, but culminated in then telling me that they have decided to distance themselves from my father for the time being, and have given him the ultimatum that unless he has a deep introspective and regularly goes to therapy, that distance may become permanent. My extended family, I've been told, are going to try and reach out or call or whatever, but I asked them if they could relay to them that it's not necessary, and that I'm fine and am sorry to them as well for ruining the day, which again, they told me I shouldn't apologize for being hurt. Since then, extended family have sent some messages with the general consensus that it's okay with some older members complaining about my lack of respect towards my father. And finally, I texted my father hoping to meet at a local coffee shop and have a final talk. I met him and he didn't look good. I think his parents tearing into him finally got the message through. I had so many things I could have said, but I instead asked him first thing if the coworker he gave the advice to took it well. He just said that neither him nor several coworkers interact with him anymore. I asked him if he truly 100% believes that every single thing he did for me as a child was for my benefit. He didn't really say anything. I then finally asked if he has any regrets for how I was treated as a child, and if he thinks he ever did anything wrong. He looked utterly defeated and just mumbled that he could have done more. I could have poked and prodded and could have gone on another rant, but instead I told him this should be goodbye and I hope he gets the help he needs. I think finally unloading my frustrations was what I needed to finally be able to move on and find peace. I absolutely need to keep on track for therapy and admit that a public bitching moment isn't okay, but I should be fine. Comments. Comment 1. This is an interesting one. The ability to control one's failures, yes, that's what I'll call your situation, is very powerful. You'll do all right. Comment 2. Congratulations sincerely on owning your actions. No matter how justified, you acknowledged your outburst was uncomfortable for others and likely not appropriate in that setting. It takes incredible strength of character to admit your failings even if you have no idea how else you could have reacted in that moment. That you immediately communicated that to your loved ones is a huge sign of how respectable and genuine you are as a person. I really hope you keep moving forward from this situation with the same mindset. Good luck. Comment 3, NTA. It sounds like you handled things well after what happened. You took responsibility by apologizing to your girlfriend and family, and it's clear you're committed to moving forward by focusing on therapy and healing. It's understandable that you snapped given everything you've been through. It's also clear that your outburst made your family realize the impact your dad's behavior had on you. Don't beat yourself up over it. You've done what you needed to do to move on, and it seems like you're on the right track now. Update 2, September 12, 2024. 3 weeks later. Things have progressed over the last couple weeks and I now have a broader context about my family. Long story short is, there was a lot hidden from me. My father was an absolute asshole to his family, and that's why they treat him the way they do. I got a lot of feedback including the compilation posts on Best of Redditor updates and Boru, and one thing that stood out was people questioning if my extended family could have contributed to the abuse and that's why he was so feeble. And since I was trying to work on my relationship with my family, I figured it was time to ask the hard questions before going that far. I met with my dad's brothers who invited me out to a popular lunch spot. For context and clarity. Dale is the oldest brother. He is married and has a daughter and a son. My father is the second oldest, self-explanatory. John is the second youngest, also married with a son. Bill is the youngest, married with 3 daughters. So anyways, we met up and I ripped the band-aid off asking about my father growing up, what he was like beyond the basics I know, and what really is going on with their relationship. Dale sighed and basically summed up that besides what I know, there is a lot of backstory I'm unfamiliar with that they never told me about simply because it was never the time nor the place to. What I've always known is that my father was fairly normal when he was young, a little shy but fantastic academically, played sports occasionally, had a close-knit relationship with his brothers, and meeting my mom in high school junior year made everything go downhill. What I didn't know was that my father was a guiding figure for his 2 younger brothers and was generally seen as one of the nicest people, with a bright future ahead of him. My grandparents adored him and he even became a little bit of a golden child, but no one minded. The reason his family doesn't respect him is what happened to his behavior when my mother got attached to him. It first started simple. My mother acted rude and distant to the family. They weren't huge fans, but my father loved her, so they tolerated it. She became possessive and slowly isolated my father and convinced him to give up his ambitions and goals. The family became concerned and spent a long time trying to talk to him and convince him to leave. My father didn't budge and began to lash out. When I was born, my extended family tried to talk to my father about my mother's attitude. My father was angry and threatened to report them for harassment. He was in denial about her behavior. When Dale's wife was having fertility issues, my mother messaged her appalling and cruel things. When Dale was pissed and went to talk to my father, he told Dale to drop it and even justified it. Dale punched him and the police almost got involved. Dale hated him going forwards. John grew to hate him when my mother insulted his son due to mild physical disabilities. My father cracked a joke about what she said. John hated him then. Finally, Bill, who always idolized my father, tried to inform my father that my mother made a pass at him and urged divorce. My father responded with a maddening call of utter hate and relationship-ending words. To sum it all up, the more time my father spent with my mother, the more he began to repeat her attitude. When they showed signs of abuse to me and tried to intervene, my father threatened to lie, to accuse them of worse things. My mother had money and lawyers and could make their lives hell if they tried, and my father would gladly let her. They were stuck and could only do so much at a time. The older members of the family, like the grandparents, great and uncles and such, believe in the traditional mindset of family sticking together no matter what, while the generations further down want to keep a distance from him. They're all stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's more. They told me out. It was all essentially that my father died on the hill for my mom, ruining his relationship with his brothers in the process. And when she died and destroyed him, he probably had to realize it was all for nothing. My grandparents seem to not want to accept the fact that he was lost, or maybe they hope he can fix his life. Who knows? This was a lot to process and was only confirmed by my father himself when he called me to ask about family therapy with us. I cut to the chase and asked if what I heard was true. He said yes. I would have agreed to maybe some family therapy, but now I have no idea. Now to the next story, story 2. After finding 2 tampons and other clues, I uncovered a disturbing truth behind my husband's secret meetings. Original post. I, 29F, have been with my husband, 30M, for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase nearly 5 years and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that, or him, were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month. When buckling our daughter into her car seat, I noticed something slotted between the cushions. I pulled it out and saw that it was a tampon. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. I brought it to my husband's attention, and he didn't seem to understand what it was, let alone why I was holding it, until I told him where I'd found it and why I was almost certain it wasn't mine. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his coworker, Fiona. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his coworkers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband, so I figured it was entirely possible the tampon had slipped out of her purse whenever he had driven with them or offered her a ride. No big deal. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat and how my husband had seemed not to have any regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb. I don't know. I did something that I now feel kind of crazy for doing. I faked an emergency and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I'd found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon there was probably the same tampon here, and in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning. This time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's coworker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I've found. What should I do? Relevant comments. I've had a period of 30 years and never put a tampon in a sock drawer. Trust your gut and get cameras. Neither have I. I've considered so many explanations for the tampons that wouldn't implicate my husband, but none of them make sense really. I'm terrified to set up a camera if it means confirming what I suspect right now. Has Fiona been over to your house and had time to plant the tampon? She's been to our house many times and vice versa. To my knowledge, she wasn't over any time in the past week, so if she planted that second tampon, she had to have found a window of time when I wasn't home. Anytime she and her husband visit, we all stay downstairs, and you'd have to go really out of your way to make it to our bedroom, that is around our dogs, over the safety gate, past the other bedrooms. Not saying it's impossible, but definitely tricky to do on a quick bathroom break, I would guess. How old are your kids? Could they have found a tampon and put it in a random place? 2 and almost 4. Both have a mischievous streak, so I didn't want to rule out the possibility of one of them moving stuff around, but I can't imagine how they'd get their hands on 1, possibly 2 random tampons that I never bought. Update post. Contemplating every possible source of 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the back seat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared tampons, save for the back seat one I had already discarded. And they were a match, just in different absorbances. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona, either fucking my husband, fucking with me, or both. Direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any changed behavior, there was none. Our house for any misplaced foreign items, there were none. And even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls, since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that. It wasn't until my younger daughter, 2yo, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice, and at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the 3rd or 4th day, I was just happy to see a near-healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week though, I came home to something strange. The toddler that I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleep suits with snaps across the front long before we'd ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass and a no-go for efficient diaper changes, IMO. It's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for, or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them, so I was bewildered. And kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice, and I went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused, like before, and asked me why I would think that. It had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again, if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out and come forward with the accusations right then and there, but our older daughter was in the room, and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a 3rd time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now, after I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that aren't adding up. Relevant comments. To answer a couple questions. My 2yo can only string together a couple words at a time, and when I ask her about her time with daddy or her clothes bow, she answers based on the cues I give her, for example, who gave you that pretty bow? And she repeats pretty bow back to me, or mama daddy, over and over. My older daughter, almost 4, was at daycare that morning, and she can't recall anything different from that day. Doesn't remember the PJ change or the hair clip, so my guess is she was changed sometime that morning, but I'm not totally sure. I have a 45 minutes commute to work, so stopping by for lunch isn't really feasible. My sister has been kind enough to leave work and drive past a few times here and there, and she hasn't seen anything out of the ordinary. We have a Ring camera at the front door, and I've got the app on my phone with notifs on. Nothing there yet. If anyone has recommendations for more discreet surveillance, I'd be open to it. I'm just the least tech-savvy person and worry another camera will be easy to detect. LOL edit. And yes, we get our carbon monoxide detectors tested regularly. Is it possible one of the hair clips came from daycare? I could see the hair clip being a possibility, but less likely on the onesie. My younger daughter hadn't been to daycare in days, and if either of them had returned with something like that before I would have noticed, especially since it was the kind of onesie I hate with a passion. LOL. People comment that they can't wait to find out the ending to this saga. My money's on the Hollywood horror ending. Hopefully dreamed up the dogs too so I can finally stop picking up their imaginary shits and whatnot. Final update post. After nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I'd gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating or caring for my kids the way I should have been. And I wasn't getting any answers. So I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my BL agreeing to help with the install setup over at mine. Before the cameras were ever delivered though, I got my long-awaited confirmation last week. A Ring notification had alerted me to motion at the front door while I was at work. Half expecting to see a delivery person, pet or lawn care salesman for the 15th time, you can imagine my surprise when I saw a clip of a young woman leading my daughter into the house hand in hand, with my husband and other daughter close behind them. The girls were supposed to be in daycare and my husband was at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the fuck this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door, knew I had gotten the Ring notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable. By the 5th or 6th subsequent call though, he did pick up. The woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She is also a registered sex offender and a recovering addict, who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had molested them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked about her, I didn't expect I ever would. But here she was, in our house, with our children. Suffice to say I was livid. It wasn't an affair at all and still, somehow infinitely more disgusting knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening. Apparently my Sil, fresh off another stint in rehab, had wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she'd hurt, and my husband was high on that list. My husband didn't want me to know or, worse, try to keep her family, our children, away from her, so they'd been meeting in secret, often at our house when I was at work. They would enter through the garage, in my husband's car, so the Ring camera at the front door wouldn't tip me off. She spent the night on a weekend I had been on a business trip and slept in our bed. She babysat our girls on a night my husband told me he had dropped them off at his parents'. She bought the girls clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow that my husband had promised in his life I had dressed her in myself. My husband swore this was all in my head. The tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist. Shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery like it was news to him and telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression, 2 years after I'd given birth. 4 years later, I told him that one of my biggest fears for motherhood was to suffer from PPD like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies and be left with a world of guilt and regret as they grew older. He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband, and because no other version of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mindfuck, I have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation. And a lot of anger. Now to the next story, story 3. My 12-year-old daughter left me for her rich stepfather. After losing her mother and being kicked out by her stepfather, she returns broke at 22. My ex-wife, then 41, female. And I, then 45, male, split up 12 years ago. She found solace in the company of a wealthy man. Sorry, there's no better way to put it. She was a stay-at-home wife and mother who had little interest in working or earning money. She wanted to stay at home and take care of the house and our daughter. I never forced my daughter to work after she was born, even though my finances were tight. I was working 2 jobs and earning enough money to eat well. However, my salary could not afford the luxury lifestyle she desired. I will not go into detail regarding my relationship with my ex. This piece is about Laura. Details regarding my ex-wife may be covered in another post. When Laura was 10, my ex-wife admitted that she had been sleeping with a wealthy man. She moved out on the same day that we filed for divorce. We became co-parents to Laura. Because I had 2 jobs and she didn't, we decided that I'd have Laura on weekends. I formed a strong bond with Laura. We have some fantastic adventure trips together. Even though the divorce was traumatic, spending time with her made me feel so much better. As time passed, I noticed Laura was delaying our meetings. Previously, every Friday, I looked forward to her email explaining what she planned to do over the weekend. However, the email's substance eventually changed to, "Sorry, I can't make it this weekend. We're going skiing," or, "We have other fancy sports or SL trips with stepfather." I initially ignored this, believing her stepfather was simply trying to keep her happy and that I should not be jealous. I eventually concluded Laura didn't want to see me as regularly. Our weekly meetings became bi-monthly, then monthly, only one day of the weekend. I saw she was not enjoying our time together as much as she used to. When it became clear that she was purposefully avoiding me, I challenged her. I tried to explain that I was doing everything I could to keep her happy, even overextending myself financially. Despite this, she continued to forsake our weekends together. She began lying, claiming she had schoolwork or projects on weekends when in fact, she was going out with her stepfather. Her excuses sounded real at times, but they were mostly made up. Whatever little time we had together, she would always complain about how much better it was going out with her stepfather since he doesn't look at the price tag before ordering anything. Even on trips I accompanied her on, she would prefer to spend time with her stepfather. She began grumbling about tiny inconveniences that previously did not disturb her. But she never stopped talking about the new PlayStation 5 or bike her stepfather gave her, or the expensive stuff her mother purchased. I felt she was too young to grasp that showering someone with material possessions is not love. The problem got worse when she ignored me for almost 3 months. Despite several calls and texts, I received no response. Desperate, I called my lawyer and told him everything. He informed me I could sue my ex-wife for alienating Laura. But Laura was 12 at the time, and my lawyer advised that if she admitted in court that she no longer wanted to spend time with me, it may exacerbate the situation. Laura could say she needed more money to live up to her lifestyle, which could imply increased child support. Yes, I was already paying child support, despite the fact that her wealthy stepfather provided so much for her. I dropped the idea of suing my ex for custody. There was no purpose. My attorney advised we have a formal out-of-court conversation with them. It would help me understand what they wanted. I agreed to go this way, and my lawyer wrote them a letter with extensive allegations. He said that we desired an out-of-court settlement. I had a strange sensation that my ex-wife would refuse to talk since she had enough money and time to burn in a court action. To my astonishment, she agreed to discuss and resolve this matter in front of the attorney. My ex-wife's husband attended the conference, as did my ex-wife and Laura. They both swore they were beyond this and had no idea if Laura was ghosting me. They admitted they had no part to play in it and stood aside, allowing Laura to speak for herself. Laura then delivered the most devastating blow of my life. She demanded that I relinquish my parental rights. That was 10 years ago, yet I still remember the frightening event vividly. I was dead silent for, I'm not sure how long. My lawyer pressed me for a response, but I just stared at everyone. What do I say? When I looked at my ex-wife, her lips twisted into a smile, as if she knew what was going to happen. I took Laura's hand and murmured, "Baby, I hope you understand what you're saying. Giving away my parental rights would mean you could no longer call me dad. You would no longer be my daughter." She shook off my hand, stared straight in my eyes and said, "Yeah, that's what I want." I was astounded. I ran out of words to explain the implications of her decision. My lawyer attempted to explain the legal repercussions, such as property concerns and other issues, but she refused to change her decision. She looked at her stepfather and questioned, "Once he disowns me, you'll be able to adopt me as your daughter, right?" He nodded with wide eyes and replied, "Certainly, darling." Words cannot express the bitterness I felt at that moment. My world was destroyed, to say the least. I lost my sense of purpose in life. After my wife of 15 years cheated on me, Lara was the one bright spot in my life. She was the one I looked forward to after working 2 jobs. I didn't date anyone for 2 years after my divorce. I didn't have the time and didn't want to. I wanted to give Lara my complete love and attention. This is what I received in return. She wanted to get rid of me. My state was so pitiful that I couldn't think clearly. My lawyer borrowed some time to respond to them. I'm sure my ex and her husband slept well that night after seeing me in such a vulnerable position. My lawyer drove me home. After he went, I cried like a baby for hours in my empty house. My heart was filled with a wide range of emotions. I contacted my folks and informed them of Lara's desire. They were completely terrified and hurried over to comfort me. My parents, particularly my mother, were really close to Lara. She had been caring for her for over a year when my wife needed surgery and was forced to stay in bed. During that time, my mother took care of both Lara and my ex-wife. Mom gave it a go, but Lara insisted that I give up my parental rights. She passionately wanted to be her stepfather's daughter. He had informed her that he couldn't adopt her unless I relinquished my parental rights. I asked my lawyer what my choices were. He suggested we could sue them for manipulating Lara, but because she was 12, it would be difficult to show she was being manipulated. Besides, they had the money to pursue a long court action, whereas I did not. Plus, what's the sense of battling when the person I'm fighting for has already decided on their side? It was a lost battle. I had no choice but to swallow the bitter pill and give up my fatherly rights. I spent the next week wrapped up in my bed. I left my second job. Who do I work for now? I lost all motivation to get up in the morning and go to work. I took so many absences from my full-time job and struggled so hard that I was eventually dismissed. I moved to a different town, slept at a subway station, and walked around like a crazy person for days. I gradually got out of it, found a new job, went to the gym and enrolled in treatment. It took me around 2 years to recover. I didn't date, but I did go on a lot of solitary treks as a form of treatment. During one of these visits I met my current wife, Brianna. She had a 5-year-old daughter named Emma. After a while of dating, we moved in together. Brianna introduced me to Emma for the first time, and I broke down. She reminded me of Lara. I strongly wanted Emma to address me as Dad, but I held back. I did not want to damage myself again. I had a healthy but distant relationship with Emma. On her 12th birthday, Emma requested me to adopt her. I felt so overwhelmed. I now have 2 kids, Emma and Amy, a 3-year-old toddler, with my second wife. I believe I've provided enough context on my circumstance. Fast forward to a week ago. I was returning from work when I noticed a familiar face smiling at me. As I approached, I saw it was none other than Lara. I felt shivers, as if I had seen a ghost. She was taller, slimmer and much more attractive, but it was easy to recognize her. She ran up to me and hugged me, saying, "Dad, I'm your daughter Lara. I finally found you." I gazed at her with lifeless eyes and replied, "I have 2 daughters, but you're not one of them." Before she could say anything, I began walking away. She followed me, but I turned around and yelled, "Quit following me or I'll report you." I did not see her after that. The next day, she arrived at my residence. As soon as I opened the door, she exclaimed, "I apologize, I know you're angry with me but please hear me out. Mom has died and Dad, stepfather, has brought his mistress home. He doesn't love me as much as he did when Mom was living. He's cut me off financially and says I need to start earning my own money. When I pestered him, he threatened to disown me." I listened to her outburst and said with a straight face, "So what?" She began pleading with me for another opportunity. I screamed at her to leave and slammed the door in her face. She then went to my mother and apologized. She was able to persuade my mother with her emotions, and now she wants me to reunite with Lara for the sake of our family. The anguish she caused me is preventing me from reconciling with her. Am I in a *** hole? Update 1. Some of you inquired about my ex-wife, wondering whether she was a gold digger, if she manipulated Lara, or if it was my fault. So here's a quick background on my ex-wife. We dated for 2 years before we married. She worked at a neighborhood bar as a waitress while we were dating. I was a regular there, which is how we first met. She was living with a coworker. I worked one full-time job and lived in a studio apartment. That's when I acquired another job, saved more money and purchased a house to accommodate her. We were married, and she quit her work. For the first 6 to 7 years of our marriage, she was pleased and content with my salary. But then she began moaning about how her friends' husbands earned more money. She would even tell me that instead of settling for me, she should have waited longer to find a richer husband. It was offensive, and we would have fights. Of course, I couldn't just stand there and take the obscenities she hurled at me. Eventually, our connection became chilly and distant. One day, she revealed that she had been sleeping with a wealthy man and would be going out to live with him. I didn't beg her to stay, but I did warn her that these wealthy men regard women like her as toys. They play with them and then discard them when they're finished. She said she didn't rush things this time, and she'd been seeing him for 2 years. She trusted him enough to live with him. After that, I didn't have anything to say. I kept quiet and sucked it up. Some of you pointed out that Lara was just 12 when she requested me to disavow her, and that I should have battled for her. You are correct that she was a juvenile when all of this occurred, and I do not deny that she was emotionally and financially misled. When she became 18, she had the option of contacting me, but she chose not to. She's now 22 and is just seeking out since her stepfather cut her off financially. Someone questioned how my ex-wife died. I didn't ask Lara about it, but she informed my mother that her mother died from a serious illness. Lara also had a liver condition and needed surgery as a baby. The problem is that Lara is exploiting my mother's emotions in order to assist her reconcile with me. Instead of discussing it over the phone, I went to see my mother and discovered that Lara had fed her sob stories to win her back. She stated she was homeless, had no employment or money, and had been living on the streets since her stepfather kicked her out. My mother requested I meet her and I accepted for her sake. Mom contacted Lara, and she arrived within an hour. I probed her aggressively and all of the facts came out. It turns out that her mother and stepfather spoiled her so much that she never finished high school. She was too busy vacationing and dining with them to think about schooling or school. I'm not sure what that man was thinking by indulging her in this way. I'm not sure what her mom was thinking when she allowed this to happen. Lara insisted that everything she did and said, including the parental rights issue and the ghosting, was part of her mother's plan to embarrass me. I asked her why her mother would do such a thing. She said it was because I didn't make enough to purchase her mom high-end clothing and accessories, which had embarrassed her in front of her friends. Lara claimed her mother devised the scheme to shame and humiliate me in front of her new husband. Listening to this was really distressing because it brought back all of the traumatic experiences I had worked so hard to forget. I told Lara that the past was done, her mother was gone, so what did she want from me now? She asked me to accept her as my daughter again. When I questioned what would happen after that, she quickly said, "It means I would be your daughter, and you would have my back." I answered, "Okay, I will accept you as my daughter, but all you will get from me is love. I'm planning to give Emma and Amy my property, insurance money and savings. But I shall cherish you as my eldest daughter. Will that work for you?" She froze. After stammering for a time, she responded, "Yeah, we can discuss money later." "You are not going to make a will now, are you?" I said, "Yes, Emma and Amy are already identified as beneficiaries in my insurance and savings accounts. I also bought a house in the new city and gave it to my second wife Brianna. I won't change any of that for you. If you're good with that, bring me the document I signed giving up my parental rights, and I'll have my lawyer prepare a new one to overturn it." She answered, "Yeah, sure." But remained mute for the rest of the conversation. My mother offered her food, but she rejected, citing a pressing matter. 2 weeks have gone and she has yet to turn up. I pointed this out to my mother, adding that it was all about money. Lara backed off after I informed her I wasn't going to give her any. What a useless piece of work she is. Update 2. I warned you it was all about money, and it certainly is. Lara returned to my mother's house 2 weeks ago, despite the fact that we had last spoken 4 months ago. She looked awful, with red puffy eyes covered in dark rings and rashes all over her body, possibly caused by swallowing something she was sensitive to. She was crying and screaming for assistance. She demanded money from my mother. Lara explained that she had been living with a friend since her stepfather disowned her, but that friend had now thrown her out as well. She claimed to have sold the majority of her items to buy food in recent months, but she now had no money or possessions. Mom questioned why she hadn't acquired a job. Lara claimed she dropped out of school and no one would hire her. Mom recommended communicating with a friend who manages a bakery to see if she could get Lara a job as a cleaner or something similar. After all, there are many careers that do not require a high school graduation. Lara remained mute and wailed, asking my mother for money. Mom gave her some packaged meals and $100. She also questioned why Lara had not brought the paperwork to challenge the disownment. Lara stated that it was at her stepfather's place and that she would retrieve it next time. She accepted the money and food, then left. Mom didn't tell me about this visit at first because she assumed I'd be upset with her. 3 days earlier, Lara returned to my mother's house with the same sob story. Mom asked what she did with the money, and Lara responded she spent it on groceries. When Mom inquired about the job, Lara did not provide a direct answer. This time, Mom refused to give her any more money, claiming she didn't have any to spare and no more food. She simply handed her a loaf of bread. As Lara was preparing to leave, Mom inquired whether she had changed her mind about being my daughter. Lara responded, "What is the sense of having him as my father if he isn't going to give me any money? He has given everything to his beggar stepchildren." Mom was taken aback by her statements and chased her out of the house, threatening her not to return. Mom quickly called to tell me about both trips. I did feel upset with her for assisting Lara the first time, and I warned Mom to be cautious while answering the door at night. Based on Mom's description of Lara's appearance, it appears that she is engaged with bad company and may pose a threat to Mom, especially since she is living alone following Dad's death last year. We want to seek a restraining order against Lara in case she returns and causes trouble again. Today I went to my mom's residence. I went outside to see whether Lara was around, but I couldn't find her. I will be staying here for a week. I don't know what to do, but I'm sad about her. If what she said about my ex-wife is correct, my ex went too far in her attempts to disgrace me, destroying her own daughter's life. If Lara is lying about it, she has already paid the price for her nasty behavior. By the way, someone remarked on my previous post that everyone has the freedom to make their own decisions, and Lara wasn't bad for choosing her stepfather over me. She was simply on the wrong side. I suppose that's true. She made a decision 10 years ago, and she has to live with the consequences for the rest of her life. Now, on to the next story, Story 4. I threatened to cut off my children's inheritance if they don't become independent by getting real jobs. Am I the asshole for being too harsh? Hi Reddit. I am a 55-year-old father and accomplished company owner. I've been running my own business for about 30 years, and I've done well for myself. My wife, 53F, and I have been married for 29 years and have 2 adult children, Caleb, 28M, and Maya, 26F. My parents left me a considerable legacy when they died, which helped me expand my firm to where it is today. So let's pretend we're financially comfortable. Now, this inheritance isn't just a sliver of change, it's a life-changing sum of money that, in the wrong hands, might easily be wasted. My wife and I have always recognized the benefits of hard work. We did not come from a wealthy family and had to start from scratch. We wanted to give our children possibilities they didn't have, but I'm starting to wonder whether we went too far. I guess that's why I'm here. I need guidance. My parents were not tremendously wealthy, but we did okay. When they died, they gave me a considerable legacy, primarily real estate, which was rather inexpensive at the time. However, I did not use that money until I had earned my own. I wanted to prove to myself, and perhaps to them, that I could make it on my own, even after they left. So I threw my heart and everything into starting my business from scratch, and it is now doing exceptionally well. My wife and I have always lived nicely, and we have ensured that Caleb and Maya had everything they needed as they grew up. They attended the greatest schools, had unlimited opportunities, and never had to struggle as I did. But this is when things became difficult. When I started generating real money, I wanted to offer my children the life I never had. They attended the best schools, dressed the best, and had everything they needed. We established trust funds for them when they were born, so at the age of 21, they had more money in their accounts than I did at the time. Caleb and Maya grew up in an entirely different environment than mine. They never had to work summer jobs or worry about paying for college, and now they're grown-ups relying on trust funds with no actual jobs or ambition. They live in their own little bubble, entirely separated from the outside world. I had always thought that as they grew older, they would desire to make something of themselves, but that has not happened. Caleb spends his days hanging around with friends and spending money on flashy gadgets, whilst Maya is into the influencer lifestyle, attempting to construct a brand around herself with no actual substance. They are both entitled, lazy, and frankly, bullies. They have never had to struggle, and it shows. I adore my children, but seeing them like this is frustrating. They don't seem to understand the worth of anything because they have never had to earn anything. My wife, bless her heart, is far more patient than I am. She keeps telling me they'll figure it out eventually, but I'm not convinced. That is why I ultimately decided to take issues into my own hands. It all came to a climax during a family meal a few weeks ago. My wife and I were discussing our retirement plans, nothing too serious, just brainstorming ideas for what we might want to do after we retire from the business. Caleb and Maya, understandably, were uninterested in the discussion until I indicated that we'd have to decide how to manage the inheritance. Suddenly, they were all ears. I suggested that they take over the company in the future, but they promptly dismissed the idea. Caleb chuckled and stated that he did not want to squander his life working, and Maya made a sarcastic remark about how she is too preoccupied with her career to worry about it. I could feel my blood boiling. I asked them what they intended to accomplish with their lives, and they just shrugged it off. Caleb claimed he didn't need to work because the trust fund was sufficient, while Maya stated that she was building her brand, whatever that means. That's when I understood how far gone they were, and that my biggest error might have been giving them too much too quickly. When I was their age, I was already working hard to earn a living. I was on building sites at dawn, learning the craft from the ground up. My children, on the other hand, appear satisfied to sit back and live off the family's fortune, with little desire to pursue their own success. I attempted to convey that life is more than just coasting on what you've been given, but they didn't hear me. They made it apparent that they had no intention of working a real job or making any substantial contributions to society. It was like speaking to a brick wall. After supper, I could not stop thinking about it. My children are grown adults, but they behave like pampered teenagers. I couldn't shake the notion that I had let them down somehow. I spent years creating something that may prepare them for life, but instead of appreciating it, they simply take it for granted. Something had to change quickly. The next morning, I sat down with my wife and explained what I was thinking. We needed to stand firm, or our children would grow up to be useless people without a purpose. She wasn't delighted at first. As I previously stated, she is more patient than I am, but she finally agreed that something had to be done. At the next family supper, I informed Caleb and Maya that I was modifying the terms of their inheritance. They would no longer receive any money until they worked full-time for at least 2 years. And by real jobs, I mean full-time work that is unrelated to our family business and pays someone other than us. There will be no begging for a position or requesting favors from our pals. They needed to find their own path. The expressions on their faces were priceless. Caleb actually snorted, as if he couldn't believe I was serious, and Maya simply stared at me as if I had a second head. I stressed that this was non-negotiable. They could either step up and demonstrate their ability to succeed on their own, or they could say goodbye to their inheritance. Caleb was the first to react. He slammed his fork down, claiming it was wrong that I was holding their futures hostage. Maya, never to be outdone, jumped in, claiming that I was attempting to wreck their lives because I did not comprehend the current world. My wife attempted to negotiate, saying that we could find a common ground, but I stayed fast. I assured them that this was for their own good, even if they couldn't see it just now. Caleb and Maya left shortly after that. They both stormed out in rage, screaming about how I was ruining everything. My wife merely glanced at me, as if she didn't know whether she should be angry or proud. I told her I wasn't doing this to be harsh. I just wanted them to mature. But even as I said it, I wondered if I had made a big mistake. The aftermath of that dinner was immediate and severe. Caleb and Maya didn't communicate with us for a week, which is rare given how much they rely on us for everything. My wife was split between supporting me and wanting to smooth things over with the kids, but she ultimately stood by my side. She agreed that they needed a wake-up call, no matter how harsh. Caleb finally called, but it wasn't to apologize. Instead, he preferred to dispute. He said I was being unrealistic, and that expecting him to find a real job was setting him up for failure. He told me I didn't realize how difficult it was for his generation, how the employment market had changed, and how he shouldn't be compelled to do something simply to illustrate a point. I heard but did not back down. I reminded him that everyone has to start somewhere, and that if he was serious about his future, he'd figure out how to make it happen. Maya chose a different method. Rather than confront me directly, she attempted to go through her mother. She informed my wife that she was supporting her brand, and that I was hurting her career by pushing her to take a job she did not want. My wife, bless her, attempted to be diplomatic, but she eventually informed Maya that she needed to stop relying on us and start working on her own. Neither one of them took it well. Caleb accused us of being out of touch, and Maya claimed that we were sabotaging her progress. They both threatened to exclude us from their life, which seemed like a slap in the face. But we did not back down. We informed them that this was non-negotiable, and that if they wanted to inherit anything from us, they had to demonstrate their ability to make it on their own. We're now in a standoff. My wife is attempting to maintain order, but the children refuse to cooperate. They've made it clear that they believe we're being unreasonable and they're not afraid to tell us so. Part of me feels terrible, as if I pushed too hard, but another part of me knows this is the correct thing to do. They need to learn to stand on their own 2 feet, even if it means being furious with us for a while. So Reddit, am I in a *** hole for giving my children this ultimatum? I want the best for them, but I don't want to push them away. Did I go too far, or is this tough love just what kids need? Update 1. 1 month later. Things became even more problematic when I posted about what was going on with my children. Caleb and Maya, still enraged by my ultimatum, decided to include the extended family. They went immediately to my in-laws and even contacted several of my cousins, talking about how unfairly they were handled. It wasn't long before I began receiving phone calls and texts from various family members, some of whom I hadn't spoken with in months, all wanting to comment on the situation. My parents-in-law were the first to call. They were understandably anxious and wanted to know what was going on. My father-in-law, who has always been a softie, believed I was being too severe and suggested I soften up with the kids. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, was more encouraging of my decision. She has witnessed firsthand how spoiled Caleb and Maya have become, and she is concerned that if we continue to enable them, they will never learn to fend for themselves. Then my cousins joined in. One of them, who is more like a brother to me, said he understood my point of view but cautioned me from pushing Caleb and Maya too far. He reminded me that our generation was raised with different ideals, and that I might need to be more aware of the pressures that young people face now. Another relative, a successful lawyer, accused me of attempting to control my children's life and advised me to let them sort things out on their own, even if it meant they failed. Despite the conflicting perspectives, I remained steady. I stressed to everyone who inquired that this was not about controlling Caleb and Maya's lives. It was about ensuring they had the necessary abilities and mindset to achieve on their own. I wasn't asking them to become CEOs overnight, but rather to demonstrate that they could hold down a job and contribute to society. I knew it wouldn't be easy for them, but I felt it was necessary. Caleb and Maya did not take this lying down. Caleb, the more rebellious of the two, decided to start a business. He claimed he was going to start day trading since he had read online about people making a lot of money doing it. He poured his little funds into it, but within weeks, it was evident that he was in over his head. He lost practically everything and then had the audacity to phone me begging for more money to invest. I told him no, that this was not the type of work I was talking about. He hung up on me, and we have not spoken much since. Maya went a different route. She began attending networking events, which appear to be little more than parties where people drink cocktails and discuss their brands. She said she was developing vital connections to help her advance her profession, but I knew otherwise. It was just another method to avoid doing a real job. When I asked how these events were translating into real opportunities, she became defensive and accused me of not believing in her. I informed her that I believed in hard work rather than playing pretend. At this point, it's evident that they're both looking for loopholes in my ultimatum. They want the inheritance without having to work hard, and it's annoying to watch them spend time on these half-baked plans. But as much as it hurts to see them struggle, I'm not backing down. Caleb and Maya began to make less phone calls as the weeks passed. When they did, the conversations were typically heated. They both attempted to guilt-trip my wife and me, claiming that we were abandoning them and that they couldn't believe we were prepared to destroy our relationship for money. Caleb even threatened to cut us off altogether if we did not back down. My wife was upset, but I could tell she was beginning to see things my way. She had always been the peacemaker, but even she was becoming upset with their behavior. We both realized it wasn't just about the money. It was about their futures, and we couldn't allow them to go down this road. Still, it was difficult to hear our children threaten to break ties with us, especially because all we wanted was for them to flourish on their own. At one time, Maya attempted to turn several of our friends against us. She claimed that we were unrealistic, didn't understand the new employment environment, and were setting her up for failure. Some of our acquaintances, particularly those with children of similar ages, sympathized with her, complicating matters even more. We began to receive unsolicited advice from individuals who had no idea what was going on, and it seemed as if the entire world had become engaged in our family drama. Despite this, my wife and I remained on course. We understood that succumbing now would only reinforce the behavior we were attempting to change, but it was difficult, really difficult. And I couldn't help but worry if we were doing the right thing. We decided to reduce Caleb and Maya's monthly allowances to make things more realistic for them. Until now, they had been receiving a rather large sum from us each month, which they spent for everything from rent to shopping sprees. But if we were serious about teaching kids to stand on their own, this had to cease. We also canceled the credit cards associated with our accounts. If they wanted to continue living the way they had been, they'd have to figure out how to pay for it themselves. The reaction was quick. Caleb called, enraged, claiming that we were attempting to bankrupt him. Maya wrote a lengthy emotional email accusing us of being uncaring and said that she didn't know how she would survive without our help. My wife and I read it together, and while it was difficult to watch her sad, we knew it was the push they needed. We responded by assuring her that this was a normal part of growing up and that we were certain she would figure it out if she tried. For the first time, they were confronted with the reality of limited cash. Caleb could no longer afford his expensive hobbies, while Maya had to cut back on her socializing. They were both angry, hurt, and bewildered, but we could only hope that this was the tipping moment. It was a tough love approach, but we felt it was the only way to get through to them. So, Reddit, what are your thoughts? Are we going too far, or is this just what they need? I'm staying solid in my decision, but it's taking a toll on our family. I would appreciate any help or insights you can provide. Update 2. 6 months later. Hello Reddit. We appreciate all of your help and advice over the past few months. It's been a difficult journey, but I thought it was time to update you on what's happened since my last post. First, I'd like to add that I took several of your comments seriously, particularly the ones about mixing tough love with emotional support. So this is what has been going on. Let us start with Caleb. He was missing for a bit after our most recent major disagreement. He wasn't returning calls, and when we did speak with him, it was evident he was still upset over the whole thing. I knew he was going through a difficult period, but I also realized he needed to figure things out for himself, so we gave him space. Caleb realized around 2 months after the ultimatum that he couldn't keep coasting on his remaining savings. With no income and no help from us, he was compelled to look for work. He initially sought to apply for high-paying opportunities in industries where he had no experience, but when those didn't work out, he had to lower his expectations. He eventually got a job at a local manufacturing business. It wasn't flashy, and it wasn't what he wanted. But it was a legitimate job with genuine hours and a real payment. The first few weeks were tough. Caleb frequently complained about the physical effort, the early mornings, and the monotony of the job. He despised every minute of it and made sure we knew. But my wife and I remained supportive, encouraging him to persevere and reminding him that everyone has to start somewhere. He gradually, and I mean slowly, began to acclimate. He began to take pride in his work, and while he would never confess it to me, I could tell he was beginning to recognize the significance of what he was doing. He's been at the facility for nearly 4 months, and while it's still not his ideal job, he's no longer considering quitting every day. He's even started saving a little portion of his paycheck, which he'd never done before. It's a little step, but it's progress, and I applaud him for sticking to it. It's evident he's not quite there yet, but I'm seeing hints of the guy I always knew he could be. Now on to Maya. Her journey has been unique, but equally tough. After we took away her stipend and canceled her credit cards, she tried to keep up appearances for a while. She'd continue to brag on social media about her fantastic life, but it was clear that things were falling apart behind the scenes. Maya eventually understood she couldn't keep pretending things were fine. People stopped attending networking meetings when they discovered she couldn't actually provide anything important in return, and parties ceased being enjoyable when she couldn't afford to keep up with the crowd. It was a terrible wake-up call for her, and for a time, she appeared lost. But then something interesting occurred. One of the people she met at a networking event mentioned an entry-level position with a marketing agency. It wasn't enjoyable, and it certainly wasn't the influencer lifestyle she'd been looking for, but it was a job. After some coaxing and encouragement from my wife, she applied and was hired. She had a difficult first several weeks too. Maya was not used to answering to anyone and struggled to acclimate to the job's structure and deadlines. She contacted us several times in tears, unhappy with her supervisor or overwhelmed by her task, but like with Caleb, we remained supportive while telling her that this was part of growing up. She gradually regained her footing. She's been with the firm for approximately 3 months, and while she still doesn't love it, she's starting to understand the importance in what she's doing. She even discussed taking some courses to hone her talents, which is a significant step for her. With both Caleb and Maya now working, our family's dynamics have begun to evolve. Our once stressful and unpleasant family reunions have gradually become more relaxed. There is certainly some stress. Caleb and Maya aren't delighted with their new circumstances, but there is also a sense of relief. My wife and I have tried to be there for them as much as we can without giving in or bailing them out, and I believe they are beginning to appreciate that. Interestingly, Caleb and Maya have begun to bond via their common professional experiences. They have always been close, but this is different. They are commiserating about their work, sharing anecdotes about their difficulties, and even giving each other advice. It's good to see them supporting one another rather than relying solely on us for everything. Our extended family has also begun to come around. The family who initially condemned our decision are starting to recognize the advantages. They've seen the changes in Caleb and Maya, even commenting on how much more adult they appear. My wife and I still have moments of doubt, but we are increasingly confident that we made the right decision. I won't lie, witnessing my children suffer has been difficult. There have been times when I wondered if I made the right decision. But seeing them gradually begin to figure things out has been fulfilling in its own way. I know they aren't out of the woods yet, but they are making progress, which is all I can ask for. So that's where things are now. I know this trip is far from over, and there will be more hurdles ahead, but I am cautiously optimistic. Thank you again for all of your advice and assistance. It's been quite helpful as we navigate this difficult circumstance. I'll keep you all updated if there are any noteworthy developments. In the interim, any suggestions for how we can continue to help Caleb and Maya without coddling them would be very welcomed. Update 3. 1 year. Mark, hi Reddit. I am back with another update. It's been about a year since the whole affair began, and I wanted to explain where we are now. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone who has followed our tale and offered advice. It's been a difficult year, but one of growth for all of us. Recently, we held a large family gathering to review how things were going. Caleb and Maya were both present, as was my wife, and it was the first time we'd all sat down together since the inheritance ultimatum began. I'm not going to lie. I was nervous. I wasn't sure how they'd react or whether they'd be willing to discuss their development. But to my surprise, the chat went better than I had anticipated. I began by telling them how proud I was of the progress they'd made over the last year. Caleb has stuck with his job at the manufacturing factory, and while he doesn't particularly enjoy it, he has made significant progress. He's acquired a strong work ethic, and his supervisor even told me, via a common contact, that Caleb has been doing an excellent job. He started saving money and is thinking of taking some night classes to better his skills. Maya, on the other hand, has begun to establish her foothold in the marketing world. She's still at the same company, but she's taken on additional responsibilities and even directed a few small projects. She started talking about her job with pride, which I hadn't heard her do before. She's also enrolled in several online classes to expand her knowledge, and she's starting to realize the importance of working her way up rather than expecting everything to come easily. We discussed the inheritance circumstances again to ensure that everyone was on the same page. I underlined that the terms remained unchanged, 2 years of steady, meaningful work before they could get their inheritance. Caleb and Maya both accepted this without fight, which was a huge relief. It's evident they're not happy about it, but they're not fighting it as hard as they were before. As we were winding up our talk, something unexpected happened. Caleb added that his employer had been speaking with him about a promotion. It's not a great leap, but it would entail more responsibility and a higher salary. He appeared shocked that he was being considered, but I was not. I've witnessed the changes in him over the past year, and I'm not surprised that his efforts are being recognized. He's still sorting things out, but for the first time, he's discussing his job as a long-term profession, rather than something he's doing to meet inheritance requirements. Maya also had some news. She's discovered a genuine joy for her marketing career, particularly the creative aspect. She's been discussing with her supervisor the prospect of moving into a more specialized function, and she's even considering returning to school to pursue a degree in marketing. This is a significant departure from the Maya of a year ago, who was more concerned with her social media following than with any genuine career path. It's been incredible to witness these developments in them. They're each starting to discover their own path, and while they still have a long way to go, they're making progress that I never imagined possible a year before. Our family dynamics have improved as a result of all of this, which has been both surprising and enjoyable. There's a true relationship today that didn't exist before. Our interactions are deeper, more meaningful, and less about money or material possessions. Caleb and Maya are beginning to perceive us as more than simply wealthy parents. We are individuals who care about their futures and happiness. We've also witnessed an improvement in Caleb and Maya's relationship. They'd always been close, but there was always a competitive edge between them, driven by who could obtain the most from us or live the most extravagant lifestyle. They now support one another in ways they never did before. They've even talked about collaborating on some side projects, combining Caleb's practical skills with Maya's creative abilities. It's early days, but it's encouraging to see children thinking about how to help one another rather than relying solely on us. This event has also brought me and my wife closer together. We've had to make some difficult decisions as a team, and while we haven't always agreed on everything, we've learned to communicate more effectively and support one another through the obstacles. It's been a learning process for both of us, as parents and partners. So, Reddit is where we're at. I am optimistic about the future, but I am aware that we are not yet out of the woods. The coming year will be critical, especially as they reach the 2-year milestone of the inheritance conditions. We'll continue to assist them as best we can, and I'll keep you all updated on how things proceed. Any ideas or suggestions on how to sustain this momentum would be highly appreciated. Update 4. Final update. Hi Reddit. It's been 2 years since I initially sought your assistance, and I wanted to provide you with one final update. It's been a long trip, and I can't thank you enough for all of your help and advice along the way. This experience has been tough, but also quite gratifying. As we approached the 2-year mark, the family felt a sense of expectancy. Caleb and Maya were both aware that the inheritance circumstances were about to be reviewed, and while they didn't say much about it, I could tell it was on their minds. They'd both come a long way since that fateful supper where I first laid down the law, and I was curious how they'd take this final exam. A few weeks before the 2-year mark, we held another family meeting. I wanted to sit down with Caleb and Maya, learn about their experiences over the last 2 years, and discuss what happens next. My wife and I were both nervous and eager. We'd seen so much progress in them, but we knew this was a key time. When we sat down for the meeting, I began by acknowledging how far they had gone. Caleb and Maya both appeared scared, but I could see pride in their eyes. They knew they'd worked hard, and I wanted to make sure they knew we noticed and appreciated it. Caleb was the first to speak. He discussed his time at the production factory and how he came to see work as more than simply a means to a goal. He's been promoted twice since my last update, and while it's still not his ideal job, he's beginning to recognize the value of hard effort and consistent advancement. He's also begun to take on some side projects, utilizing the talents he's gained at work to create something of his own. It's evident that he's considering his future in a way he never has before. Maya then told her story. She is still with the marketing agency, but her work has become more specialized, with an emphasis on creative projects. She's also taken some college courses in marketing and design, and she's discovered a genuine enthusiasm for her profession. Maya has always been creative, but now she's turning that creativity into something solid, something that could lead to a real job. She's pleased with her accomplishments and optimistic about the future. After they were finished, my wife and I discussed our ideas. We told them how proud we were of their growth, how they had overcome obstacles and learned from them. We discussed how important their trip has been and how it has prepared them for whatever is ahead. Then I surprised them. I informed them that due to their growth, we were increasing their inheritance. I stressed that this was more than just a reward for completing the 2 years. It was a recognition of the individuals they had become. They were astonished and, I believe, overwhelmed, but largely thankful. For the first time, I felt as if they genuinely appreciated the importance of what they were receiving. Not just the money, but also the lessons they acquired along the road. So where are we currently? Caleb and Maya are significantly better off than they were 2 years ago. Caleb is still working at the company while also working on his own projects, and he is considering starting his own firm eventually. Maya is excelling at her marketing agency and is thinking about obtaining a degree full-time. They've both matured tremendously, and I couldn't be more proud. So this is my final sign-off. Thank you for following our story and helping us along the road. If I could leave you with one piece of advice, it would be to never be hesitant to challenge your children, no matter how difficult it may be. Sometimes the most difficult decisions lead to the greatest growth. Good luck to everyone, and I hope your own parenting experiences are as rewarding as ours have been. Take care Reddit, and who knows, perhaps I'll return someday with another story. Until then, cheers. Now to the next story 5. My brother had an affair with my fiancée, Got her pregnant before my wedding, and my parents supported him over me. This will be a lengthy one, and it's as disorganized as it sounds. Though there is much to explore here, I will attempt to keep it as succinct as feasible. Whether someone believes this or not doesn't matter. It's just so ridiculous that I have to voice this. I won't sugarcoat anything either, but I will steer clear of any information that would allow someone unfamiliar with the circumstances to identify myself. Up until a few months ago, I was engaged to my 5-year girlfriend. We will call her Sarah. 32-year-old guy. Let's call my younger brother Mike. He is 29 and has always been the perfect child in our family. I have to provide some background on my family and how we came to this place if I truly want to grasp the depth of this betrayal and why it struck me so deeply. Mike could not do anything wrong in our parents' view growing up, whereas I was continuously chastised for the most minor transgressions. This was clear and severe, not simply ordinary sibling rivalry or minor partiality. Mike broke something, and I would be accused. I would be the one grounded while he started a fight. He would get a new video game console if we both received straight A's. I would get a pat on the back and be advised to keep it up. Our parents, Tom and Linda, always found a justification for their actions. Mike's younger brother requires more attention. Given you are the older one, you ought to know better. We have to be careful with Mike, he is just more sensitive. I felt unworthy and unwanted in my own house from the never-ending assault of double standards and gaslighting. The preference just grew as we aged. When I enrolled on a partial scholarship in a decent college, my parents hardly noticed. But they threw Mike a big celebration and purchased him a car to drive with when he decided to enroll in community college. Not mind that for years I had been riding 5 miles each way to my part-time work. I left right away to get away from the poisonous surroundings at home. I worked 2 jobs, pay debt, and negotiate college. Mike left a semester later, saying he didn't belong in college. Our parents entirely agreed with his choice, complimenting him for knowing himself and for not fitting social norms. Over the next 5 years, they even funded his string of failing companies. My family always found a way to drag me back in, even with the space I tried to create between us. Holiday dinners were a torture of subdued jabs and not quite subtle comparisons. "Oh, are you still working at that entry-level job?" "Well, Mike is considering launching another company. He is quite entrepreneurial." Not that I was really laying a solid career while Mike was devouring our folks' retirement money. I tried to keep a friendship with Mike despite all. Though it was always one-sided, he remained my brother after all. I would try to connect, reach out, and he would either ignore me or find some way to make the discussion into a competition he might win. Should I get promoted, he would suddenly have a great opportunity right ahead. If I began dating someone, he would also magically be in a committed relationship. I met Sarah in one of my attempts to get back in touch with Mike. We clicked right away as she was friends with one of his brief relationships. Smart, humorous, compassionate, and extremely beautiful, Sarah was everything I had ever wanted in a companion. We began dating, and for the first time in my life I felt really cherished and joyful. My parents were inevitably less than delighted. They questioned what Sarah saw in me and made disparaging remarks about how she was out of my level. Mike, on the other hand, started abruptly to show great interest in my life. Wanting to know everything about Sarah, he would ask about her non-stop. I was simply glad he seemed to be interested in something from my life at the time. Looking back, I ought to have spotted the warning signs. After 1 year of dating, Sarah and I moved in together and things were fantastic. We both drove, had decent jobs, and discussed the future. I began to feel as though perhaps, just maybe, I could have the great profession, loving partner, maybe even children someday that I had always wanted. On our 4th anniversary, I asked Sarah. It was simply a peaceful supper at home and a moving speech, nothing spectacular. She answered yes, and I thought I was on top of things. We agreed to engage in a protracted process and slow down wedding preparation. We had our whole life ahead of us. Or so I believed. We were not in a hurry. To put it mildly, the responses were mixed when we told my family we were engaged. Saying, "Oh, how nice," in a tone that implied it was anything but, my mother slapped on a fake grin. "Grunt," my dad murmured. "Good luck with that," then turned back to watch the TV. Mike, though, had the most unusual response. He praised us, but his smile seemed almost predatory and wrong. I dismissed it then, attributing it to my own fears. Work stress and wedding plans occupied the next year. Working long hours at our jobs, Sarah and I were saving money for the wedding and a down payment on a house. Though we saw less of each other than we used to, I reasoned it was only a phase. Every marriage experiences difficult times. Looking back, I ought to have seen the warning signals. Sarah grew more aloof, constantly on her phone, grinning at texts from someone she would rapidly claim to be merely an acquaintance from work. She began leaving more with her pals, arriving late home smelling of cologne and wine. I did, however, entirely trust her. I never even gave her any thought regarding possible cheating, let alone with my own brother. Sarah started acting somewhat strangely over 4 months ago. She was temperamental, restless, and often sick. Thrilled with the possibility, I considered perhaps she might be pregnant. We had not been trying, but we discussed wanting children at last. Imagining nursery colors and baby names, I began to arrange how I would help her. She dropped the bomb one evening after sitting down with tears in her eyes. Though not mine, she was pregnant. I looked shocked. Our hectic schedules had caused us not to be close in a while, but I never anticipated she would cheat on me. She broke down totally and mumbled, "It's Mike," when I inquired who the father was. My whole universe collapsed in that instant. Everything I knew, everything I had built my life around, came toppling. I found it difficult to breathe. I had no ideas. I could only feel this intense loss and treachery. Sarah tried to clarify. Her words came out in a hurry between sobbing. Apparently, it began during our engagement party. Mike had cornered her and informed her she was making a mistake in marriage. Playing on her insecurities, he reassured her she could do better and he could give her everything I couldn't. They had been having an affair for months, so it was not just a one-time occurrence. That evening, I sent Sarah out. I couldn't stand to look at her or be in the same room as the lady who had so totally betrayed me. She begged me to pardon her. Said it was a mistake. Said she loved me. But all I could think of was how many times she had lied to my face. She had been with my brother how many times wearing the ring I had given her? I phoned Mike after Sarah went. Not even now can I recall what I said. All of it was a haze of hurt and wrath. At first, he attempted to seem cool, saying it was only a drunken error and that it had no bearing on anything. He became hostile and responded, "Well, maybe if you'd have been a better fiancé, she wouldn't have come to me." When I pressed him, I observed ready to do anything that would cause him regretting what he said, I got in my car and headed to his flat. Though I'm not sure what I intended to do, our parents were already there when I arrived. Mike apparently initially phoned them, crafting some narrative about how Sarah had seduced him and how terrible he felt. And you also know what? They came to believe him. Always they do. While my dad merely stood there with his arms crossed, looking disappointed in me, of course, not in his dear Mike, my mom started lecturing me about forgiveness and family right away. They wouldn't listen when I tried to describe exactly what happened. They insisted that since family comes first, I should forgive Mike and help Sarah through the pregnancy. I forgot. Years of pent-up wrath and bitterness spilled forth. I told them just what I thought of their distorted sense of devotion. How they had always favored Mike at my cost. How they never once stood on my side or helped me. Mike was dead to me, I informed him. He was no longer my brother. Since they no longer had me, I advised my parents they could have the son they had always desired. Ignoring their calls and pleads, I bolted. Without a goal in mind, I drove for hours just desiring to get away from everything and everyone. When I got home, I had hundreds of missed calls and messages, some from Sarah begging for another opportunity, some from Mike alternately between apologies and accusations, but most were from my parents, demanding that I grow up and atone. I seldom ate, hardly slept, ignored them all. Using all of my accumulated vacation time, I called out of business. I avoided everybody and found it intolerable to have to explain what had happened. Trying to find where I'd gone wrong, I simply sat in my apartment going back over every minute of my relationship with Sarah and every contact with Mike. 3 months have gone by now. To handle all this turmoil, I changed my number, relocated to a new apartment and began treatment. Still, my family won't let go. Even with my best attempts to cut touch, they find ways to meddle in my life. Starting to show up at my place of employment, they are trying to ambush me and drive a reconciliation. Crying about how I'm separating the family, my mother corners me in the parking lot. Gruff voicemails from my dad on how I should man up and pardon Mike. Mike has personally tried to approach me on a few occasions, but thus far I have been able to dodge him. To guilt trip me into forgiving Mike, they have even dispatched flying monkeys, that is, extended family members. Suddenly blowing my phone, aunts, uncles, cousins I haven't spoken to in years are reminding me how important family is and how I should let bygones be. They seem to be living in some other world where what Mike and Sarah did was only a minor error rather than a life-altering one. The most recent growth is yesterday Sarah sent me a note. She intends to co-parent with Mike and is keeping the baby. And now, guess what? About becoming grandparents, My parents are over the moon and totally overlooked the circumstances of how it happened and the nasty comments my mother and father made when Sarah was with me. Apologues and explanations abound in the letter, which discussed how Mike and she had discovered true love in trying circumstances. She even dared to add she hoped the child will benefit from us all being friends someday. I am at the very end of it. Part of me wants to simply sever ties entirely and start over somewhere else, perhaps go to another state, change my name, create a new life free from knowledge of this mess. Another side of me, though, is so enraged that I want to stay and fight so they may realize how screwed up things are overall. Not sure what to do going forward. Every sphere of my life has suffered from betrayal. Alone with my thoughts makes me uncomfortable. I never gave dating any thought either. I get terrified thinking of depending on someone like that. Folks who believe I should choose the high road and reconcile with my family, as if I am the one in the wrong for not wanting to play happy families with the folks who most wounded me, have lost friends over this too. The idea of Sarah and Mike having a kid together, a child that ought to have been mine, is like a continual knife in my stomach. Logically, the youngster is innocent in all this. The baby's parents are lying, cheating scumbags. It is not the baby's fault. But I cannot feel anything nice about its existence. My parents have begun discussing my obligation to participate in the lives of the child and my role as an uncle. I get sick physically at the idea. How am I expected to approach this child without spotting the final emblem of my brother's treachery? Reddit, I suppose my question is. Am I the expletive for not forgiving my brother and ex-fiancé? Is it bad of me to wish to terminate relations with my family over this? Any guidance on how to move forward would be much valued since right now I feel as though gaslighting and treachery are drowning me in the sea. I understand this was lengthy. If you have read thus far, thank you. In a sense, just writing all this out has been relieving. I'm not sure what I should anticipate from publishing this. Maybe validation, guidance, or maybe just the opportunity to yell into the void and have someone, anybody, hear me. Edit. Holy mess, this exploded overnight. I appreciate all of your support and counsel. The response overwhelms me, and it will take some time to look over all the comments. Nonetheless, I wanted to answer some typical queries. 1. Certainly, I have discussed a restraining order against my family with a lawyer. It is under work. 2. No, I am not intending to interact with the baby. Although the child is not at fault, I cannot be engaged without losing my sanity. 3. For anyone curious about my employment. I have previously discussed the matter with HR. They are sympathetic and aware. They have given me the opportunity to work from home more regularly and raised front desk security levels. I appreciate their awareness. 4. Many of you have inquired whether I have given any thought to migrating to another city or state. I am very definitely considering this. There are offices of my company in various other cities, hence a relocation could be feasible. I am balancing the advantages and disadvantages. 5. To those advocating DNA testing, Sarah came clean about the affair and the chronology fits. I have no cause to think the child isn't Mike's. Even if by some miracle it turned out to be mine, I'm not sure I could ever look at that child without considering this. 6. The volume of persons relating such tales has overwhelmed me. Knowing how frequent this kind of treachery is breaks my heart, but it also curiously comforts me since I'm not alone. I appreciate everyone's vulnerability and sharing. 7. To the person asking whether I had thought about suing Mike for alienation of affection, I investigated it but sadly, my state does not accept it. Though right now I'm not sure I have the stamina for a legal fight. 8. Several have noted that Mike's actions seem egotistical. Many of the articles I have begun reading about narcissistic personality disorder speak to me. Though not justification, some of his behavior helps me to comprehend. 9. For anyone wondering about Sarah's family, they are as startled and repulsed as one would anticipate. They have cut off communication with her and contacted me to give their support. Though little consolation, I value it. 10. To the person wondering whether I considered having children of my own someday, to be honest, this whole experience has made me doubt whether I want a family at all. I'm trying though, not to make any major decisions while I'm still digesting things. Though I'll let you know if anything noteworthy occurs, right now I'm concentrating on recovery and forward movement. Once more, thanks to Reddit. More than you would realize, you have contributed. Your guidance and encouragement have really been a lifeline amid trying circumstances and have given me much to consider. Though I can't answer every remark, kindly know I'm reading them all and they help me feel less isolated in this. Update 1. Hey Reddit, it's been a total rollercoaster 2 weeks since my last post. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the great advice and support. Reading over all your responses has been both sad and yet consoling. I never anticipated my post to explode like that. The frequency of this sort of treachery is disorganizing. To put it mildly, the last several weeks have been demanding. Recall my remark of working on a restraining order. That descended into a complete ordeal though. We had a hearing booked after my attorney turned in the paperwork. Given the facts and ongoing harassment, I felt it would be simple. I corrected myself. With their own attorney, an elegant man in an expensive suit most likely charging more per hour than I earn in a week, my parents turned up for the hearing. Claiming I was separating the family over a basic misunderstanding. As if Mike had stumbled and fallen into my fiancé, they painted me as the unstable one. Luckily the judge was not purchasing it. She issued the restraining order against Mike and my parents, but not without my mother crying in the courtroom and my father gazing at me like I had just committed murder. Mike's expression though, I swear, if looks could kill, I would be 6 feet under. Mike tried to get to me as we were exiting the courtroom, reminding his attorney of the recently imposed restraining order. She stood between us. Mike merely scoffed and stated that I couldn't hide behind a piece of paper permanently. This is not over. If I said his remarks didn't knock me a bit, I would be lying. For now, at least I have some legal protection. Another dream has been the office scenario. Recall how I mentioned my family had started showing up at my workplace? That reached a head last week though. My assistant buzzed in reporting my mother was in the lobby and creating a scene while I was in a meeting with a client. She apparently brought a photo album and was trying to show my colleagues infant images of Mike and me as she sobbed over how her boys used to be so close. I left the conference and descended to the lobby, where I discovered my mother surrounded by a bunch of awkward-looking colleagues. She was midway in recounting how Mike and I used to bathe each other when young children. She rushed toward me when she saw me, chatting about a baby shower, but I stopped her. She should leave right away, I told her, or I would call the cops and have her taken off for trespassing against the restraining order. Her expression resembled what I would have slapped her with, but after everything they have gone through, I couldn't muster myself to care. Security let her out, and I had to spend the next hour damage management with my employer and colleagues. Fortunately, most of them were understanding, but I could see others were wondering what kind of drama I was bringing into the workplace. Still, the incident with Mike was where it truly veers off course. I was at the gym last Saturday working out some of my resentment on the punching bag. I was so intent on my exercise that I didn't see someone approaching me until I heard his voice. As I whirled around, Mike was grinning at me like he hadn't just broken the restraining order. He began to run his lips loud enough for others close to hear. He chuckled when I urged him to go before I phoned the police, claiming he would tell them how I had been threatening Sarah and him. I became lost at that point. My fist hooked with his jaw as I struck at him. He stammered back, then launched himself at me. Except this time, no one told me to be the larger person and let Mike win. We ended up on the floor trading punches like we were kids again, without parents to break us up. Before the gym personnel drew us apart, I made a few decent hits. I could feel my eye bulging closed while Mike's nose was bleeding. We were both screaming, seeking release and aiming at one another once more. It was only when the gym manager threatened to call the police that I snapped out of it. I got ready and headed off. Still pulsing with excitement, I answered a call from an unidentified number as I was headed home. Against better taste, I responded to it. Sarah, shouting at me about how I had cracked Mike's nose, might require surgery. I laughed. It was not against will. Her anger at me following all they had done seemed ridiculous, too much. I apologized to her for hurting her little boyfriend, the one she had been sleeping with behind my back for months. She began to cry then, continuing on about her stress, how the baby could sense her misery and how selfish I could be. I blocked the number and hung on hers. The fight produced quite a strong blowback. News had crept across our social circle like wildfire. Texts from friends and relatives, some supporting me and others calling me names for beating my poor defenseless brother, were exploding on my phone. Reaching out once more, Sarah's parents expressed their dismay in their daughter and reiterated their support of me. Though at this point I'll take anything I can get, it was a meager comfort. Nowadays, the restraining order seems inadequate. Mike has proved he is ready to break it, hence I'm concerned about his future actions. The legal fallout has been a horror show. My attorney called me the day following the gym incident. Mike apparently had accused me of assault. I described what had happened. How Mike had provoked me. How he had broken the restraining order. We would fight it, my lawyer groaned, but given that I delivered the first punch, it might be an uphill struggle. We are already pressing our own charges against Mike for breaching the restraining order. Though nothing is definite, my attorney feels sure this will strengthen our case. I had to show the cops the marks on my face and knuckles and make statements to them. Having to defend myself against my own brother makes one embarrassed. Mike and I have been banned from the gym, although I can't say I blame them. It sucks, That gym was one of the only places I felt I could properly release some of my wrath. I have always been close to my cousin Amy, so she contacted me the other day. The family has been complaining a lot about her supporting me, but she is not wavering. She shared with me some of what goes on behind the scenes. My parents apparently have been telling everyone I'm experiencing some sort of mental collapse. They claim I'm just jealous and can't let go since Sarah and Mike's relationship began shortly following our breakup. While some family members are buying it, Amy notes that many others are not. Knowing that they are out there propagating lies about me while I'm trying to keep my head down and heal irritates me. Things at work have been, to put it mildly, strained. I can sense my colleagues are walking on eggshells around me following the incident with my mother in the lobby and the fight with Mike that is trending on local social media. Early this week, my manager summoned me into his office. He began by stating he valued me as an employee and that I'm going through a trying period, but then he really hit me. He believes it would be best if I took a break just till things calm down. If you would want, he continued, we can call it a personal sabbatical, paid, of course. I wanted to disagree, telling him that right now only work keeps me sane, but I could see the choice had already been taken. I agreed, thanked him for his patience, and got to work packing my office. 2 of my colleagues were gossiping about how my brother had got my fiancée pregnant as I was leaving. I departed slamming my office door louder than required, rather pleased to see them jump. Saying all of this isn't hurting me would be dishonesty. To get out of my apartment, I have started late-night lengthy rides. Sometimes I find myself wondering how the hell my life turned into such a mess when parked outside my previous apartment, the one I lived with Sarah. Amid all of this turmoil, I discovered help from an unlikely source, Sarah's younger sister Emma. Emma contacted me on social media, apologizing for her sister's behavior and lending her support. I was first dubious. What if this were some sort of trick? But after chatting with her, I found she shares my hatred of Sarah's actions. She has been sharing with me details on Sarah and Mike's life. Apparently, they have moved in together and act as though they did not simply blow up many lives to be together. Emma says Sarah has been trying to present herself as the victim in all this, sobbing to anybody who will listen about how she never meant to hurt anyone. And in what ways she and Mike are soulmates who found each other against all odds. I get ill to my stomach from it, but I appreciate Emma keeping me current. After all, information is power, even if it is knowledge I would prefer not have. Another horror has been the social media scenario. When it comes to social media, I have always been a really quiet person. But this whole incident has put me in an unwelcome public view. On a local Facebook group, someone, probably one of Mike's buddies, posted about our gym brawl. The post omitted our names, but it sufficiently detailed the circumstances to allow anyone who knows us to work it out. The section on comments became a battlefield. Some people were supporting me, claiming Mike received his just compensation. Others called me erratic and advised I should be locked up. One night after a few too many beers, I made the grave error of looking over some of the comments. I ended up hard enough tossing my phone across the room to break the screen. Since then, I have turned off most of my social media accounts. The continuous alerts and the messages from folks I haven't spoken to in years suddenly wanting all the juicy specifics of my personal life make me unable to handle it. Having all that has transpired, I have come to see I cannot continue to live in this city. Too many memories abound. Too many opportunities for running across either Mike or Sarah or my parents. I've been researching moves inside my organization. Our Seattle office has a seemingly interesting opening. Though I've never loved continuous rain, at this point I would relocate to the moon if it would mean escaping all this drama. Though I have not yet made any decisions, the concept of a fresh start is growing more and more intriguing. New city, new apartment, new life. Somewhere nobody remembers me as the man whose brother knocked down his fiancée. Since the restraining order was obtained, my parents have been unusually silent. I'm waiting for the other shoe to fall so they may find some fresh approach to try to push their way back into my life. Sarah has been distributing the word of her pregnancy all around. Emma tells me she has been sharing regular updates on social media, ultrasound images, belly shots, the works, always with a caption regarding how grateful she and Mike are, how thrilled they are to start their family. Every additional bit of data feels like a fresh wound opening, the hurt just waiting to resurface when I start to heal. Right now then, is where things stand. I felt 2 weeks ago that my life could not become any more disorganized, but strangely it has. I still hurt and am angry, but I also am exhausted. Tired of justifying myself. Thus Reddit, I suppose this is more of an update than a change of direction. Not sure, a cry into the emptiness. Right now I'm not even clear about what I'm asking for. Advice? Affordability? Time machine? I could go back and never introduce Sarah to my brother. I'll attempt to keep you all informed whatever occurs going forward. More to me than you could realize is the result of your support. It's encouraging to be reminded that even if it seems as though lies and treachery rule my entire life, there are still decent individuals out there. Final update. Hey Reddit, I'm back with what I expect to be my last post on this entire fiasco after not updating for a week. First of all, I want to thank each of you for your help and guidance along this process. During the worst of my life, your comments have been a lifeline. Where therefore ought one to start? In just 7 days, a lot has transpired. I am still working to sort it all. I suppose I would begin with the most important news. I am relocating. Indeed, that's correct. I jumped in and agreed to a transfer to our Seattle headquarters. Though it was not a simple choice, I felt I needed a fresh start following all that had gone down. The choice followed last week's really difficult day. I had just returned from another meeting with my attorney regarding Mike's assault allegations when I came upon a note in my mailbox. From Sarah it was. Curiosity won me over even though I nearly threw it away without opening it. Inside was a handwritten note discussing her and Mike's great excitement about their baby and an ultrasonic image. She continued on regarding how the baby would love to have its uncle in its life and how I could find it in my heart to be pleased for them. Red caught my eye. I had grabbed my phone, unblocked Sarah, and phoned her before I knew what I was doing. She grabbed up the second ring and I let loose. I informed her exactly what I considered her, Mike, and their contented small family to be. If she believed I would ever want anything to do with that child, I told her she was insane. As far as I could tell, Mike, the baby, and she could all go to hell. Though it wasn't my best moment, it seemed like I'd at last uttered all the things I had been holding back. I realized then I had to leave this city. That same evening, I phoned my supervisor and said I wanted to move to Seattle. To be really honest, he seemed relieved. He was probably concerned about how this drama would damage the business. He guaranteed to expedite the documentation, and by the next morning it was official. 2 weeks allowed me to pack my life and go across the nation. My family and social circle soon started to buzz with word of my relocation. Normally, my parents were rather angry. Once more breaking the restraining order, they showed up at my flat unannounced trying to talk me out of it. Saying I was deserting the family, my mother was crying. Red-faced and furious with my selfish and immature behavior, my dad was ranting. I stayed quiet. I just phoned the cops and had them taken off for breaching the restraining order. My mother yelled that I would regret this, that family was everything, and I was throwing it all away as they were being let out. I just closed the door and resumed packing. Mike responded in a different way. Presumably because of ongoing legal concerns, he did not try to personally reach out to me. Instead, he posted a long piece on social media on how some people struggle to see others happy and on how he and Sarah were overcoming hate to concentrate on their new family. Clearly meant for me, it sought to present himself as the victim. Though I'll confess it stung to see how many people liked and commented in support of him, I told myself that their viewpoint doesn't count as they don't know the reality. Among the most unexpected responses was Sarah's. Following our phone talk, she contacted her sister Emma, who, should you recall, had been keeping me informed on Sarah and Mike's developments. My statements apparently struck closer than I had anticipated. Emma informed me Sarah had broken down, confessing she was afraid of the future and felt what she and Mike had done was terrible. Bless her, my cousin Amy said she could help me pack. She even informed me further about the family situation. Amy informed me that my aunt, the sister of my mother, had a major blowout with her mother, calling her out for consistently favoring Mike and driving me away. It grew really heated, with my aunt remarking that with their years of favoritism, my mom and dad were reaping what they had created. That someone is at last calling them out on their behavior makes me somewhat happy. Although the legal matter is still under flux, my attorney tells me that my relocation has no bearing on anything. Mike broke the restraining order, hence we are still charging him fees, and we are contesting the assault accusations he leveled against me. Given Mike's track record of breaking the restraining order, my attorney feels sure the judge would see through his lies. Moving across the nation should also help prove that I am not a threat to Mike, thereby helping to have his charges dropped. After this, I'm not sure whether I will publish any more updates. Starting anew means bidding farewell to the past, and as beneficial as this community has been, I believe it's time for me to distance myself from rewriting this narrative. I have to concentrate on starting my new life instead of muckering the old one. This thus seems to be my last update. Hope for me, Reddit. In Seattle, I have a completely fresh life ready for me and want to maximize it. Now to the next story 6. Dad planned to marry his young girlfriend just weeks after my mom's death, threatening to kick me out. Am I the asshole for ruining his wedding? My father has always mistreated me badly, He was obviously not interested in being a dad from a very young age, but I never could find out which he disliked more, being married to my mother or father to me. Given that he treated my mother no better than he treated me, I believe he must have loathed it equally. I lost my mother only 4 weeks back. I turned 17 some months ago. It was not surprising. She had been battling lung cancer for some time and at last passed away in a hospital. 3 years ago she was diagnosed. Since then, it felt like I had been holding my breath. I believe I at last let it all go when Mom died. She was my friend, thus even now it feels quite strange to be without her around. She was most crucially the only person there to guard me from my father. Every single day in the house where I grew up, my parents would argue over something or another. They obviously did not love one another, and I really have no idea why they were married. My mother would tell me that they had loved each other at some time every time I asked her why she had married him. They would always make up, but I never could forgive my father as fast as my mother did. She had been urged to leave him several times as occasionally he would say extremely terrible things to her during a quarrel. He would say things like how he wishes she died from her illness so he could go on with his life and how he regretfully ever was with her and had a child with her. She just resisted when I advised her to go several times. I'm not sure why. Regarding myself, I had wanted to go from the age of 4 years old but had nowhere else to go and no other relatives either. Raised by her grandmother, who passed away while she was in college, my mother was an orphan who had lost her parents in an accident when she was small. She contacted no other family members, hence I knew nothing about my father's side of the family as he never took us to see them. He claimed not wanting us to see his family since he did not get along with them. There was no elaboration, and I asked him too, afraid. I was used to being screamed at for stuff, hence I wasn't going to paint a bullseye on myself by prying into anything like that. I had to deal with my father since, all told, my parents were the only family I had. My mother refused to go. I was heartbroken when she died, but my dad carried on as though nothing had happened. It was not shocking to me in the least since he had been acting the same way even when she was unwell. Knowing he did not love anyone, I did not expect him to be sensitive. He most likely lacked even that ability. What truly startled me though, was that my dad brought home a considerably younger woman once we were finished with the funeral and paperwork 2 weeks after my mother died. She was simply here one morning drinking coffee in our living room. My father told me she was my new mother when I plucked the bravery to ask her who she was. When he was telling me that, he apparently also had the largest smile on his face, probably his creepiest one yet. Against my will, I found myself remarking on it. Since it had only been 2 weeks since my mother died, I told him it was a little too soon to bring his girlfriend home. That brought me to a lecture from him on how this would be my stepmother in a few days and on the need of respecting her. He told me he didn't care that I had just lost my mother. I had to treat her the same way I had treated my own mother. He dropped another bombshell on me and informed me he was getting married as I was over myself with rage trying to argue with him. Ever since her diagnosis, he claimed, he had known that she would not be able to make it as she had always been delicate and frail ever since he had known her. He had thus begun searching for substitutes. That is exactly the word he used. For the past 2 years he had been with Melissa, his girlfriend. Now that my mother was at last out of the way, he told me he was planning to be married once more and ensure her death had no impact on his life at all. It at once made sense why he had been untouched by my mother's illness and death thus far. He had replaced her. I honestly just turned away from him because I was disgusted. I told him I would not be attending the wedding, and expected him to say he was good with it since, really, why would he care? Then he informed me I had to go, which caught me off guard. He informed me he could only make this look regular and acceptable to other people if I attended, so explaining why it was. He seemed to be saying that by showing up for the wedding, I would have accepted it and that since his own daughter had not objected to this marriage, nobody else would have any cause to remark on it either. Basically, he required me to be there so it would seem less depraved, which in and of itself was really crazy. To be honest, my father seemed insane. Besides saying such strange and pointless things, he was getting married 2 weeks after his wife died without thinking about what other people would say. Not only that, the woman marrying him was only 25 at most, a few years older than I am. Her actual age is unknown, however she cannot be older than that. My dad falls in late 40s. This man, who recently lost his wife to cancer and should be in mourning right now, is instead getting married and expecting his daughter to act like this is all normal and that she supports it. It is eerie enough. He definitely belongs in a straitjacket in a padded room. It's a complete formula for catastrophe. I told him there was no way I could be at this wedding when he informed me he was marrying Melissa. He was free to become offended at that as desired. Then he informed me he would not only be offended but also kicked me out should I miss a meeting. He would also ensure that I never got access to the college fund my mother and he had been saving for me ever since my birth. Since, as he had stated, my mom's money had gone into the education fund as well as his, so I considered it to be essentially unjust. Although I think I was entitled to it, sadly I couldn't make him turn over the money to me as it is not required by law. There were no records to support it, hence it was not as if he had set it aside especially for that purpose. Basically, I would be tossed out and would not have any chances of attending college either if I skipped that wedding. On one hand, I did not want to seem like I was part of this or that I was encouraging this craziness in any kind whatsoever, thus I was in a quite tough situation. However, I also had to look out for myself as I had a few months left before I left for college and I couldn't afford to lose money since I had none of my own. My mother's will takes some time to process, hence I would only obtain the inheritance only then. For now, it seemed as though my only choice was to show up for the wedding and present myself as helping my father. Last week I was informed about the wedding, but I just couldn't get myself to welcome it. I thus resolved that I had to go all out to prevent this from occurring. Or at least try to intervene. I told my father I would be at the wedding, but then I started searching for something, anything, to throw off the proceedings since I just couldn't bring myself to let this happen. I just wanted something. I really had no idea what I was looking for. When my father left his laptop alone, I got quite lucky, miraculously lucky. A few days back, he and Melissa went out to celebrate their marriage by dinner. I was alone at home. Leaving his laptop on the coffee table, my dad had since it was locked. I expected nothing when I opened it, therefore I just tried to guess the password. Fortunately, I got everything just perfect. Melissa's name came first, then his own birthday, which was strangely startling. Still, once I arrived, I could hardly believe it. I first found nothing when I started browsing his social media. Then I saw he had 2 Facebook profiles, and I chose to review the second one, which I had not seen before. Surprising me was his hidden account set up for his side of the family. He had been telling my mother and me he did not get along with his family, but here he was on his other page hanging out with individuals we had never seen before who seemed to be certainly linked to him. As I searched, additional pictures from years past turned up. He obviously has been in contact with his family all along. He had simply been fooling us. I then chose to review his communications on that account and discovered that he had been in contact with his parents for really a lengthy period. I guess he also carried another phone. From the start, he had been living essentially 2 lives, and nobody knew. Although my mother had known about some of this, she had never shared anything with me. Neither had my mother. I was rather sure his family knew nothing about me whatsoever. Following his talks with his father on his account, I discovered that his father believed he was living away from home for business only, nothing else. He had a full family here, little knowing of it. I snapped brief pictures of those conversations and turned to my own phone to talk to my grandfather. Given all of this was so absurd, I was really anxious about whether he would even believe me. I could hardly believe it myself. Still, I went to my room and signed in using my own Facebook account. I got in touch with the profile I saw on my dad's page. As I had predicted, there had been no mutual friends. So I had never been able to locate him. I had never been able to track these people as I hadn't even known my grandfather's true name for all these years. Having his account now, I messaged him straight away and tried to rapidly explain everything. This was an emergency, hence I provided him my phone number and advised him to get in touch as soon as he could. I included additional pictures of the screenshots I'd taken, outlining how I had tracked his profile. I also sent some pictures of me with my parents so he would know this was not a hoax directed on him. After not hearing anything for the following 12 hours, I nearly gave up hope. Maybe he had chosen not to react since he felt someone was pulling a practical joke on him. But I eventually got a call from my granddad when Dad was at work. I was simply lucky that he had phoned me before that and had not mentioned this to my father. Anyway, I answered my phone and told him what was happening as soon as he called. For the past 17 years, he informed me, he had been made to believe that my father was working elsewhere, that is, away from Iowa, where he was originally from. Apparently, my dad had a separate house and everything here, which is where my grandparents had lived whenever they paid him visits. He had also visited his son several times. About none of this, they had the least of knowledge. They had spent the last 12 hours trying to get over the shock of it all. At first this all seemed to them as a joke, but they came to recognize it was real when they viewed my mother in the family pictures I had emailed. Apparently, my father had told his parents he had broken up with my mother, so he had never told them about his marriage and the family he had. They disapproved of her 18 years ago, when my parents first began dating. He had informed my grandparents he had dumped her as they were quite clear they did not want my father to marry my mother. For the past 2 decades, it was the fiction he had been selling. Now he had at last been caught. My grandparents had not wanted my father to wed my mother for really serious reasons. It was because they accused my mother of being a gold digger and she had reportedly been trying to cheat on him. This was due in part to the first time my father had brought my mother home to see his parents. She had instantly targeted his older brother, a surgeon who clearly made more than my father. My uncle's refusal to keep his lips shut over something so significant led my grandparents to learn about it. My father had been asked to split up with my mother, but he had turned down their proposal. I believe it was because of me since, based on my calculations, my mother most likely already was pregnant by then. My parents were given an ultimatum. Either they would cut him off from their life or he would split up with my mother. They understood she was only with him for the money, hence cutting him off would drive my mother to leave him. Eventually, my dad told them he had split things off with my mother, although obviously he had not, as they remained together. And this is the reason I'm here. If my mother had really done such things, I wonder why they stayed together. This fundamentally altered my view of both my parents. Once I knew these things though, I told my grandparents how badly I was being treated and that I had nowhere else to rely on. But I was depending on them now that I knew they existed and wasn't as alone as I had first thought. I still would understand if they turned away from me. Thank goodness they decided to assist me. I was able to stop the wedding from taking place. Like his parents, I returned to my father's house also. 2 days ago they flew down here. Yesterday, I managed to slip them into the wedding. All of a sudden, we were honored guests. Our backyard was the venue for the wedding as just a small number of guests were expected to attend. It was supposed to be a modest and private ceremony. Only my father's colleagues and boss, a couple of his acquaintances, and that was it. He had obviously not invited his family. They had not even received invitations to his first marriage. But I arranged for their attendance at the second. I emailed my grandparents and informed them it was finally time for them to show up as I wanted to halt everything before the vows were taken. Melissa had walked down the aisle and everything. I slipped out right before the vows, and then it was my turn to walk down the aisle with my grandparents for the theatrical purposes of it all. My father's face dropped and Melissa seemed fairly perplexed as soon as he saw me walking down the aisle with his parents. Once I drew close to him, I declared that his parents now knew the truth, that I had at last exposed all his falsehoods. He could bid farewell to his inheritance since all was now coming to me rather than to him. Since I already had a place to live, people looking after me, and also my college fund, I no longer needed him either. Knowing he was a liar, I did not want to be with him, so he could do anything he pleased. I then left with my grandparents, and since then we have been staying in a hotel getting ready for our trip back. Since I haven't known these folks, my grandparents need a lot of catching up. Likewise, there is plenty to discuss about my parents. We haven't returned yet mainly because this morning my father finally got in touch with my grandfather and informed him that what he did was simply not proper. He had supposedly never allowed his parents to be happy and accused them of trying to control him all his life. Saying I just couldn't stand to see him happy with anyone else, he also accused me of trying to ruin him by showing up at the wedding like that. Since Melissa is now avoiding him and the wedding was clearly called off yesterday itself, immediately after we left, he is blaming all of us. I am therefore good with showing up for his second wedding with his parents and exposing him for lying. Update 1, the wedding call-off was 4 days ago. I decided not to answer my father. He does not deserve it. My grandparents agreed as well. He knows where to find us should he wish to communicate with us. We still occupy the hotel. We have provided him with the specifics. If he would want to talk with us, he could come see us and then we could have a personal conversation. But the kind of conversation we wish to conduct over the phone or via text is not this one. He still hasn't turned up yet, and just 3 days remain before I return to Iowa with my grandparents. They have a farm there, they're really wealthy, and I will be taken care of considerably better than I was here. They assured me that they would see to it that I could attend the college of my choosing and that I wouldn't have to suffer following this. Since we first met, my grandparents have been almost pampering me. I believe they are attempting to make up for lost time, which is rather lovely of them. Though they seem to love me a lot, they loathe my mother and subsequently my father as well. Update 2. My grandparents and I are meant to be leaving in 2 days. My father decided this morning to at last pay us a visit and speak with us. When they contacted me this morning, I was really taken aback to see him in my grandparents' hotel room, but I immediately recovered and vowed not to talk to him the whole time until he apologized. Clearly though, given someone like him, that is too much to demand. He was here just to discuss how unfair it was that my grandparents had opted to cut him off from their life and hand me all the wealth instead. He claimed to have already lost Melissa, my mother, and his wife as well. Things were already really terrible for him since I also wanted no more contact with him. To top it all, his close friends and colleagues, all the attendees of the wedding, are now acting strange with him. What transpired at the wedding has damaged his reputation. Hence he is thinking of leaving his employment. He believes he cannot operate in such a hostile environment. To put it plainly, he had kind of lost all he owned till a few days earlier. Then we showed him at the wedding, exposed him, and wrecked everything for him. The least we could do was let him inherit, something he had been striving for years. Otherwise, he would not have lied to all of us for so long in the first place. He started lying since he merely wanted everyone to be happy. After marrying my mother, he said he had intended to tell his parents the truth, but as time went on it became more embarrassing to bring up. He had to keep up his lies and arrange a complex double life. Since everyone, including his parents, was against his happiness, he asserted he was the victim. Now, knowing I would be taken care of anyway, he came here to claim what he felt due to him, the legacy. From the start, he had been hoping and fighting for this. It would be unfair to deny it for such a minor cause. The way he was behaving as the victim infuriated me already. I lost it totally when he declared he deserved the fortune. I screamed out at him before my grandparents could say anything, "If you really deserve that inheritance, then I also deserve to be treated like a human being for the past 17 years. He had never shown me any love, affection, or even the smallest of respect. 2 weeks after I lost my mother, he had genuinely threatened to kick me out and use my education fund for his own expenses if I opposed his marriage to his young girlfriend. It was only fair his parents took away anything he thought he deserved since he could not give me anything I deserved. My behavior startled him since I had never before stood up to him like that. But now, thanks to my grandparents, I no longer felt terrified of him. Usually when I was younger, this worked to shut me down. He tried to glare at me, but this time I wasn't going to be silent. Earlier, I would do that since I knew my mother wouldn't leave, probably for the same reason my father didn't cut off relations with his parents: money. Which upon her death, was ultimately futile. Her only advantage from living with him was passing away at a reputable hospital. My dad tried to yell at me when I refused to be quiet, but my grandparents told him it wasn't going to work anymore. My grandparents threatened to call security on him, thus after some conflict he had to leave. He wouldn't get anything unless he owned and accepted his mistakes. They were very plain. It would take a lot even then for them to pardon him. Had I chosen to keep the inheritance for myself, he would not have anything at all. Promising he would make sure we pay the price for what we had done, he fled like a toddler having a tantrum. What he believed he was doing is unknown to me. Though he most likely thought his actions would frighten us, it did not. It strengthened our conviction that, by not forgiving him, we were doing morally. He was not even remorseful, hence nothing could be forgiven. It gives me great pleasure to be leaving with my grandparents in a few days. I simply want to escape all of this. Although I will miss my buddies, it makes no difference now. Fall brings my trip to college. I just finished all of this. I graduated from high school. Update 3. Hi. So I left home 1 year ago. I haven't blogged anything for the previous few months since I have been really busy with college. I had essentially forgotten about it too. Following that battle with my dad in the hotel room, which I discussed in my last update, my grandparents and I headed off. We hardly spoke with my dad over the following 2 weeks, but I did run across a lot of members of his side of the family. I believe this family is the one I deserved all along. They all love me. Though she was too self-serving, my mother most likely attempted to love me. Ultimately, it damaged me more than it did her. My uncle assured me he would pay for my college tuition, therefore relieving me of any concern about it. That has been a great comfort. Though they had hardly known me for a few weeks, these folks had already resolved to show me all the affection I had been lacking for the past 17 years. For that, I am most grateful. A few months after moving in with my grandparents, I had to go to college, so I spent little time with them. My college is near where they reside, so on weekends I get to see them. There are no grievances regarding that. Not to apologize, but rather to remind me that I wrecked him and should feel bad. My father has tried to get in touch with me multiple times. He continues asking me to check on my grandparents to see whether he fits the inheritance. He emails and chats from several accounts but doesn't understand that being defensive won't support his cause. A sincere and honest apology would be the only thing that could assist him, yet at this time, it is too little, too late. I will simply ignore him. It is not worth it to reply to him. I lack the time or will to indulge his illusions. At last, I have the family I am due and am content with them. Right now, I'm loving my college life. So I will concentrate on the advantages in my life and attempt to forget about the past. I simply want to keep on improving personally. Now to the next story 7. My son tried to kick me out of my home to finance his dream house and start his own family. I am a 65M single parent having spent the past 32 years alone. Laura, my wife, died while our son Gary was just 3 years old. She got in an automobile accident on her way home from work, hence the loss was abrupt and terrible. We were a happy family of 3 one minute, then I was left to raise our small kid by myself. Early on those years were really demanding. At the time, I was a high school English teacher and suddenly I had to balance my employment with full-time parent duties. On evenings when I would sit on Gary's room's floor observing him sleep, I would wonder how I would handle it all. Still, we managed daily to make it work. Over the years, I gave up a great deal. Promotions that would have needed more travel or longer hours declined. Gary always came first, so I missed out on social events and dating possibilities. I never, however, objected to it. Gary was my universe. Seeing him develop into a content, healthy young man made all the difference. Things grew simpler in some respects and more difficult in others as Gary aged. While the emotional obstacles of parenting a child were more pronounced, the practical ones became lessened. Gary began to probe his mother more, and I tried to preserve her memory for him. Together, we would review picture albums and I would share anecdotes about her. Though it was complicated, I wanted him to know how much Mom had loved him. Gary and I had a wonderful connection in spite of the obstacles. We were great buddies, not only father and son. We both loved sports, especially baseball, and some of my best recollections are of Gary being taught to throw in our backyard. We used weekends for hiking or camping as he grew older. When Gary was admitted into a decent college, I felt really proud. Watching him pack for his dorm room was mixed, but I was happy for him to begin this next phase of his life. Over his college years, we kept in close proximity. I loved those talks as he would call me for guidance on everything from his studies to girl problems. Gary returned home after college in search of work. He ran across Jane during this period. She came from a rich background, was clever and attractive. Though at first I was glad Gary had discovered someone who brought him great delight, over time I began to see changes in his conduct. Always talking about the beautiful places Jane took him to or the costly gifts her parents bought, he grew increasingly preoccupied with worldly objects. Reminding myself that Gary was a mature man entitled to live his life any way he wanted, I tried not to let it disturb me. But the sensation that he was transforming into someone I didn't know persisted. Though I had reservations, I was glad for Gary and Jane when they declared they were getting married. Though Gary insisted Jane's parents were paying for everything, I volunteered to assist with wedding expenses. The wedding was an opulent event considerably more grand than anything our family was accustomed to. Among Jane's friends and family, I felt awkward. Yet I put up a courageous front for Gary's benefit. Gary and Jane moved into a lovely property in an affluent area following the wedding. That was quite different from the little house Gary had grown up in. Occasionally I was asked there for supper, but in their contemporary house I always felt like an outsider. Jane was courteous but aloof, and I sensed she considered me as embarrassing. Gary disappeared from my view as the years passed. His high-powered career and new way of life occupied him. Our talks felt surface level. Although I missed my kid, I reminded myself that this was inevitable in raising a new family. Then around 6 months ago, I decided to do something that would fundamentally alter everything. I choose to call it quits on instruction. After 40 years in the classroom, I thought it was time. I was 65. Having extra free time excited me, maybe for vacation or a new hobby pickup. Gary's response when I informed him I wanted to retire startled me. He appeared worried rather than delighted for me. Inquiring about my financial condition, he wanted to know whether I had enough stored up. I reassured him that throughout the years I had been frugal with my money and had a reasonable pension. Though I wasn't wealthy by any means, I had enough to live reasonably. Gary advised me then to sell my house and live with Jane and him. The proposition immediately appealed to me. It seemed to me as evidence that Gary wanted to reconnect and have me play a more major role in his life once more. Then he began discussing the value of my house and how the sales proceeds would benefit us all. I liked my house. It was where Gary had grown up and where we had created many treasured memories. I never gave it any thought. I told Gary I was glad where I was, even though I appreciated the offer. Though he appeared let down, he avoided raising the matter. Gary began phoning more regularly over the next 2 weeks. Every time he would bring up my selling the house notion. He discussed how I might help them at home and how everyone would benefit from it. His tenacity began to irritate me. Then, about a month after I retired, Gary and Jane showed up at my place without warning. They claimed to want to discuss my housing circumstances. Jane spoke much of the time, outlining their intended family starting point and how great it would be to have me there to assist with the grandchildren. Her voice, though, seemed strange. She seemed to be pitching me something. It was obvious as the discussion progressed what they truly desired. Though they needed more money for the down payment, they were looking at a larger house in an even more upscale area. They reasoned that if I sold my house and lived with them, I could put the money toward their new house. I would have a room in their house in exchange and live among their family. Using the promise of family intimacy to gain my money, they seemed to be trying to control me. I told them straight out I had no intention of investing in theirs or selling my house. Gary was irate, but Jane remained calm and said they were simply trying to support me. I shook when they went. My kid, the small lad I had reared on my own, would try to pressure me in this way, and I couldn't believe it. Over the next few days, I considered our relationship and sought to identify when things had gone so wrong. 1 week later, Gary gave a call. This time his voice was different. He claimed they had no option but to handle things as I was not ready to be sensible. He told me the house I was living in belonged really to him. I remembered putting the house in both our names when Gary turned 18, even though I had bought it when he was a small boy. Never expecting he would turn it against me, I saw it as a means of ensuring his future. Gary claimed to be co-owner and intended to sell the house as he was entitled to do so. What I was hearing, my own kid was threatening to sell the roof over my head, wrangled me. Saying that this was my house, I objected and Gary said, "You're retired now, Dad. You simply are an old useless man. We have a future to consider, Jane and I." The next several weeks were a misery. Beginning to show real estate brokers, Gary and Jane insisted on offering house tours. They dismissed my objections, as though I were not even here. Watching strangers move through my own house, I felt like a ghost. I once listened in the kitchen as Jane spoke with Gary. She didn't know I was in the room next door. "We have to clear the useless old bones from here," she remarked. "I find it amazing that you let him freeload for so long." Gary's answer was just as nasty. "Don't worry, we will have him gone shortly. He has had his time, now it is ours." I collapsed. For now the son I had given everything saw me as nothing more than a burden. Lost and alone, I didn't know what to do going forward. That's where I find myself right now. My son and daughter-in-law are aggressively trying to sell my house out from under me. They have made it abundantly evident that they consider me as nothing more than a worthless old bone getting in the way of their ambitions. About my future, I'm frightened, angry and wounded. At 65, I never thought I would be in this situation facing possible homelessness from the avarice of my own child. How did my relationship with my son get here? Update 1. It's been a month since I last posted and I can't believe how much has transpired. The issue with Gary and Jane has only worsened, and I find myself in a position I never imagined conceivable. Following my initial post, I resolved to take action. I couldn't simply sit back and let Gary and Jane sell my house from beneath me. I contacted an old friend, Dean, who is a lawyer. I've known Dean since college, and he's always been there for me. When I explained the problem, he was outraged and offered to assist me pro gratis. Dean investigated the legal issues of my circumstance. It turns out that, while Gary's name appears on the deed, there are regulations that protect me as a long-term resident. Dean stated that Gary could not simply force me out or sell the house without my approval. This gave me a little sense of relief, but I knew the war wasn't done. I've decided to confront Gary and Jane. I asked them over for supper, expecting that in a quiet, familiar setting, we could have a logical conversation. I spent the entire day preparing Gary's favorite meal, pot roast with all the fixings. It was the same dish I made for his birthday every year as he grew up. When they arrived, we sat down to eat, and it felt nearly like old times. We exchanged casual conversation regarding work and weather. I finally decided it was time to confront the elephant in the room. I informed them about my conversation with Dean. I stated that what they were attempting to do was not only ethically reprehensible, but potentially unlawful. I hoped that the knowledge would cause them to reconsider their actions. Gary's reply did not meet my expectations. Instead of backing down, he became infuriated. He accused me of threatening him and attempting to influence him using legal jargon that I did not understand. Jane jumped in, stating I was selfish and jeopardizing their future. I tried to remain cool, explaining that I was not threatening anyone. I just wanted to keep my house, where I had raised Gary and where we had shared so many memories. However, my comments appeared to go unheard. After dinner, Gary and Jane stormed out, leaving me alone with a table full of half-eaten food. I spent the night reading through old photo albums, looking at images of Gary as he grew up. I couldn't connect the happy youngster in those images with the man attempting to take away my home. The next day, I received a letter from the law company that represents Gary and Jane. They were disputing my right to stay in the residence, saying that Gary, as co-owner, had the authority to sell. The letter was full of legal jargon that I didn't understand, but the message was clear: they were willing to take this to court. I quickly called Dean. He calmed me, but told me that court battles may be exhausting, both emotionally and financially. He warned me to be ready for a tough struggle. Over the next 3 weeks, my life was occupied by legal consultations and paperwork. Dean was quite helpful, explaining everything in language I could understand and guiding me through the process, but it was exhausting. I couldn't sleep because I was so scared about what was about to happen. During this time, I also began reaching out to old acquaintances and coworkers. I hadn't realized how secluded I'd been in recent years, focusing solely on Gary and his family. It was a relief to reconnect with individuals who knew me and recalled what a good parent I had been to Gary. One of these individuals, my former coworker Susan, promised to let me stay with her if things became really terrible. It was comforting to know I had somewhere to go if the worst happened, but the prospect of leaving my home shattered my heart. As the legal battle progressed, Gary and Jane's methods became increasingly aggressive. They began spreading stories across the neighborhood that I was mentally ill and needed to be placed in a care facility. Some neighbors I'd known for years began avoiding me, giving me weird stares as we passed on the street. Stress was having a toll on my health. I found myself always weary and lost my appetite. My doctor warned me about the consequences of stress at my age and recommended some sleep aids, but medications couldn't relieve the agony in my heart that accompanied every thought of Gary. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and I had an unexpected visitor. It was Jane's mother, Elizabeth. I had only met her a few times at family gatherings, and we had never been close. She appeared embarrassed as she stood on my porch, but I politely invited her in. Over a cup of tea, Elizabeth explained why she had come. She had overheard Gary and Jane discussing their plans and was appalled. She told me that she and her husband had no idea what Gary and Jane were doing and did not agree. Elizabeth apologized for her daughter's actions and offered to help in any way she could. After everything that had transpired, it was difficult to trust anyone connected to Gary and Jane, but as we spoke, I could tell Elizabeth was genuinely distressed about the situation. She told anecdotes about her own father, who had lived with her in his latter years. She couldn't imagine treating a parent the same way Gary and Jane treated me. Before she went, Elizabeth handed me an envelope. There was a large check inside. She encouraged me to accept it, stating it would help with legal bills or whatever else I needed. I was astonished by her generosity and attempted to reject it, but she wouldn't have it. She made me promise that I would let her know if I needed anything else. It was good to hear that not everyone in Gary's new family agreed with his conduct, but it also made me sad to think that my son's in-laws were treating me better than he was. The court battle dragged on. Gary and Jane's lawyers were aggressive, launching every legal argument they could think of at us. Dean was doing a wonderful job of defending me, but the constant back and forth was exhausting. On a particularly rough day, I found myself sitting in the garden, gazing at the old treehouse Gary and I had built together when he was 10. It was aged and faded, but still standing. I remembered the summer we spent building it, Gary's delight as we pounded each nail, and the pride in his eyes when we were done. Now that same boy was attempting to take away the house where we had shared so many good memories. As I sat there, deep in meditation, my phone vibrated with a text. It came from Gary, our first direct communication in weeks. The message was quick and cold. "Dad, this is your final opportunity. Agree to sell your house and move in with us, or we'll make sure you get nothing." This was not the son I had reared. The Gary I knew would never have threatened his own father in this way. I did not respond to the text, but I did keep it. Dean had told me to keep track of all communication between Gary and Jane. The next day, I had a meeting set with Dean to discuss our future strategy. As I was about to depart, I heard a disturbance outside. I peeked out the window and saw Gary and Jane in the front yard, supervising a crew of workers putting up a for sale sign. I raced outdoors, wanting to know what was going on. Gary claimed they were simply prepared for the inevitable. I informed them they had no right to put up a sign because the house was not for sale. Jane laughed and replied, "It will be soon enough, old man." I stood there helplessly, watching the workers finish putting up the sign. Neighbors started to emerge from their homes, curious about the disturbance. That night, I was unable to sleep. I continued repeating the day's events in my head, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. I found myself thinking about Laura and what she would say if she could see what our boy had become. The next morning, I awoke to see my front yard packed with people. Gary and Jane had arranged an open house without my knowledge or consent. Potential buyers were roaming through my house, inspecting my belongings as if I weren't even present. I was infuriated. I called Dean immediately, and he encouraged me to capture everything. So I started filming and photographing the guests in my house, making sure to capture Gary and Jane's features properly. Some of the potential purchasers became uneasy when they realized I was the homeowner and had not authorized this open house. As the day progressed, more and more people showed up. Gary and Jane were excellent guests, taking people around my property and pointing out highlights as if they had the authority to market it. I overheard Jane informing one couple that they were assisting her poor, bewildered father-in-law in making the transfer to assisted living. The brazen deception infuriated me. I attempted to speak with some of the possible purchasers to explain the issue, but Gary and Jane kept interrupting me and guiding people away. At one point, Gary told someone that I was not quite right in the head. By the end of the day, I was both exhausted and heartbroken. After the last potential buyer had left, Gary and Jane remained, apparently satisfied with themselves. Gary had the arrogance to tell me that the open house was a huge success, with several interested parties. He told me I should start packing my belongings. I could not handle it anymore. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt spilled forth. I told Gary just how I felt about him. How selfish and greedy he'd become. I reminded him of all the sacrifices I had made and the love I had shown him. I questioned him how he could do this to me, in remembrance of his mother. For a brief moment I thought I saw a glimpse of the old Gary in his eyes, but when Jane murmured something in his ear, his countenance hardened. He said I was living in the past and needed to recognize that things had changed. They then went, leaving me alone in the house, which no longer seemed like home. That night I reached a choice. I couldn't keep living this way, always on edge, waiting for the next thing to happen. I needed to gain control of the situation. I called Dean and informed him that I wanted to pursue more aggressive legal action. He cautioned me that things may get ugly, that Gary and Jane might retaliate even more harshly, but I didn't care anymore. I needed to fight for my home and my dignity. The following few weeks were filled with legal meetings and court appearances. Gary and Jane's lawyers threw everything they could at us, but Dean was great. He produced evidence of their harassment, including video footage from the unauthorized open house. He battled over my rights as a long-term resident and co-owner of the property. Throughout it all, Gary and Jane sat in the courtroom, chatting to each other and their lawyers while rarely glancing at me. It was as if they no longer saw me as a person, but as a barrier to be overcome. The stress of the legal struggle was getting to me. I lost weight and had difficulty sleeping. My doctor was concerned about my blood pressure and emphasized the significance of attempting to remain calm. But how could I remain calm while my own son attempted to make me homeless? As the court case reached its conclusion, I had another unexpected visit, this time from Jane's father, Robert. He, like his wife, appeared uneasy as he stood on my porch. I allowed him in, wondering what had brought him here. Robert was straightforward. He informed me that he was ashamed of his daughter's actions and disappointed in Gary. He claimed that he and Elizabeth had raised Jane to be better than this and couldn't understand what had changed her. Then Robert did something unexpected. He offered to buy out Gary and Jane's half of my house. He stated he couldn't stand by while they destroyed our family for money. His offer startled me, and I had no idea how to answer. Robert assured me that this was not charity. He said that he and Elizabeth had already planned to make Jane and Gary a hefty down payment on a new house. Instead, they planned to use the money to buy out Gary's part in my residence. This manner, I could stay in my home while Gary and Jane received the money they desired. Robert's kindness surpassed my expectations. It appeared too good to be true, the ideal solution to this misery. However, I was also suspicious. I'd been hurt too many times in the previous months to trust lightly. I told Robert that I needed time to consider his offer and discuss it with my lawyer. He understood and handed me his card, asking me to phone him when I had made a decision. The next morning, I called Dean and informed him of Robert's offer. He cautioned me to tread cautiously. We agreed to meet with Robert to discuss the details. The meeting was held in the dean's office a few days later. Robert brought his own lawyer, and we spent hours discussing the details of the proposition. By the end of the meeting, we had reached an arrangement that appeared fair to all. Under the terms of the agreement, Robert would buy out Gary's part in the house, giving him and Jane the funds they needed for their new home. In exchange, I would maintain full ownership of my home. Of course, there were some conditions. I had to commit not to sell the house for at least 5 years, and if I did decide to sell later, Gary and Jane would have first refusal. It wasn't a flawless solution, but it was better than I could have expected. I would keep my home, while Gary and Jane would receive their money. Maybe, I thought, this will be the end of the war. I should have known better. When Gary and Jane learned about the arrangement, they were enraged. They accused Robert and Elizabeth of interfering, siding with me against their own daughter. Gary called me, raving about how I had turned his in-laws against him. I tried to explain that this was a fantastic solution for everyone and that they were still receiving what they wanted, but Gary refused to listen. He claimed I poisoned Jane's parents against them and was manipulating everyone. Gary closed our talk by informing me he never wanted to see me again. He stated that he no longer regarded himself as having a father. These comments wound worse than everything else that had transpired. Despite Gary and Jane's misgivings, the transaction went through. Robert bought out Gary's part in the house, making me the only owner. The legal proceedings had been concluded and the for sale sign had been taken from my front yard. In the weeks that followed, I attempted to return to normal. I started taking better care of myself, eating correctly and exercising. I heard through the grapevine that Gary and Jane had purchased their dream home in the exclusive community they'd been looking at. I wondered if they were content, if the money and the large house were worth everything they'd done to obtain them. As the months went, I gradually came to terms with everything. Final update. It's been a while, about 2 years after the court struggle finished. One day, I got an unexpected delivery in the mail. It came from Jane's parents, Robert and Elizabeth. The contents included a photo album and a letter. The letter mentioned that they had been browsing through old family photos and discovered several pictures of Gary from various family occasions throughout the years. They thought I'd want to have them. It was a wonderful gesture that I greatly appreciated. The last page of the album had a surprise. A recent photo of Gary and Jane posing in front of their new home showed Jane holding a little placard that read "Baby on board." They were planning to become parents. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photograph. I was about to become a grandfather. It was something I had fantasized about for years, teaching my grandchildren to play catch or telling them goodnight stories. Now it was happening, but I didn't know if I'd ever get to meet this youngster. That night, I wrote Gary a note. I obtained their address from the return label. In the letter, I congratulated him on the baby and expressed my happiness for him. I told him I understood if he didn't want me in his life, but I hoped we could reconcile someday. I told him I loved him and would always love him, no matter what happened. I mailed the letter the next day, not anticipating any reaction. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing. I tried to put it out of my mind and concentrate on the positive things in my life, but I couldn't stop thinking about Gary and the baby. Then, around 8 months after I submitted the letter, I was outside watering my flowers when a car pulled up. To my surprise, Gary exited. He looked different, older and more serious. He stood there for a bit, simply looking at me, before approaching and hugging me without saying anything. It was strange at first, but I could feel him relax, so I hugged back. We remained there for a moment, neither speaking. Gary's eyes welled up with emotions as we parted ways. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'm so sorry." We stepped inside and Gary shared his heart over cups of coffee. He told me how ashamed he was of his actions, and how the burden of trying to fit into Jane's environment had shifted his focus. He claimed that being a father made him understand how badly he had treated me. Gary stated that he and Jane had been going through some difficult times. The stress of the new house, the baby on the way, and the guilt over what they'd done to me had all put a strain on their relationship. They'd started couples counseling, which had helped Gary see how far he'd wandered from the ideals I'd instilled in him. I listened to Gary's apology and explanation. As he spoke, I saw the guy I'd raised, the gentle, sensitive son who had been my best friend for so many years. But I could see changes in him. He was more mature and mindful of the implications of his behavior. Gary informed me about the baby, a young girl due in a few months. He explained that he and Jane had done a lot of thinking and wanted me to be a part of their child's life. I was moved by the offer, but I made it clear that things could not simply return to normal. Too much had occurred. There had been too many harsh words and actions. If we were to continue our relationship, we needed to agree on new conditions. Gary understood. He advised we start slowly, perhaps meeting for coffee once a week, and gradually restore our friendship. I agreed. As Gary was leaving, he paused at the door. "Dad," he began, "I know I have no right to ask, but would you consider being present when the baby is born? I really want my daughter to meet her grandfather." The request astonished me and left me feeling conflicted. I wanted nothing more than to be present for my granddaughter's birth, but should I trust Gary and Jane? Finally, I told Gary I would think about it. He nodded, acknowledging my hesitation. Over the next 2 months, Gary and I met for coffee on a regular basis, occasionally with Jane. These sessions were frequently awkward at first, as we all danced around the elephant in the room. However, we gradually began to ease around each other. Jane apologized for her role in what had occurred. She added that she had felt a lot of pressure from her parents to marry up and provide a specific lifestyle. She'd become engrossed with materialism and lost sight of what was truly important. Pregnancy had also served as a wake-up call for her. I appreciated Jane's apologies, but as with Gary, I made it plain that re-establishing trust would take time. She seems to understand and respect my boundaries. Gary called me 2 weeks before the due date, panicked. Jane had gone into labor early and was on her way to the hospital. I did not hesitate to meet him there. I spent the following few hours pacing the hospital waiting room. Gary came out at regular intervals to provide me with updates. After what felt like a lifetime, Gary emerged with a big smile on his face. "Dad, do you want to meet your granddaughter?" I followed Gary inside the room. Jane was in bed, fatigued but delighted, holding the tiniest, most precious little bundle I'd ever seen. Gary carefully removed the baby from Jane and delivered her to me. "Dad, meet Lily Laura." My granddaughter was stunning when I first held her. Her middle name is Laura, which is the name of my late wife. I looked at Gary and questioned him. He cracked a grin and continued. "We wanted her to have a piece of grandma, to honor the amazing parents who raised me." Over the next few months, I spent as much time as possible with Lily. Gary and Jane were fantastic in incorporating me into her life. My friendship with Gary and Jane also improved. We talked more honestly about what had happened and worked through our concerns. So that is it, Reddit. That is my experience over the last 2 years. I appreciate all of the helpful suggestions you've given me, but it's time for me to quit writing and spend more time with my family. Now to the next story. 8. Mom abandoned us, leaving me to raise my brother. Now she's dying and needs my kidney. My brother pleads for me to save her. What should I do? I, 29F, need some outside ideas since I'm in a terribly mess-up state. Saying no will cause our family balance to be destroyed, and I'm under pressure to give a kidney to my estranged mother, 52F. We learned my mother's kidneys are failing last month. She must start dialysis, which is not ideal long-term, according to the experts. She needs a transplant right away. Out of the 2 children of my mother, I am a perfect match and Ezra, my brother, is incompatible. They tested me and my brother. There is really crazy pressure to donate. Saying it's a chance to heal our family and atone for Mom, Ezra is asking me to do it. He doesn't understand that I am not the one who left. I am not interested in healing anything. It was not me that decided on drugs instead of family. It feels like a smack in the face when he asks me to save the mother he hardly knew at the price of the sister who reared him. Though my dad, 54M, is not directly pressing me, I can see optimism in his eyes. Though he claims he will help whatever I decide, it is clear he wants me to do it. It makes me ill since he is dreaming of having his lovely family returned. Mom hasn't straight up asked me for the kidney, but every time I see her I can sense the question hovering about. Part of me wants to scream at her and find out where this worry originated throughout my 13-year raising of her child. Knowing her life is in my control, another element seems strangely strong. Here's a little background since, although you might assume I'm vengeful, I am not. My mother disappeared from my life 16 years ago along with my brother. He was 5 years old and I was 13. She was hooked on drugs, and one day she simply disappeared, leaving our dad. Dad made every effort, but he had to work insane hours to have food on the table and a roof over our heads. Dad always worked, hence I essentially had to raise Ezra. At 13 years old, I was helping him with homework, making sure he ate, and trying to explain Mom's absence from the scene. It sucked, massive scale. I was so busy playing Mom, so I missed out on childhood. Growing up, I was furious with everyone. Mad at Mom for leaving, mad at Dad for not being there enough, mad at Ezra for needing me so much, and mad at myself for not being able to make everything right. While I was figuring out how to split a package of mac and cheese into 2 meals, I saw other children lead typical lives. Ezra found it easier. I confirm this. Though it meant I could not. I wanted him to have as normal a life as possible. I concealed my own tears so I could clean his, lied to him about why we cannot afford things, acted as though everything was fine when Dad and I were hysterical about finances, and so on. It was abundantly evident as we grew older how different our early years were. Ezra went sports and hung out with friends. I was too busy becoming a mini adult to engage in any of that. This widened our gulf greatly and got more pronounced with time. Dad was doing his best, I understand now, but back then it felt as though both of my parents had dropped me. Though it still stung, I know Dad had to decide between being here physically and ensuring we wouldn't go without food. During my teens and early 20s, I was messy. I drove people away, made poor mistakes, and partied too excessively. Starting to handle all this baggage required years of therapy. Things improved when I met my 31M hubby. Though he has been quite patient and sympathetic, my prior problems surfaced even with him. I panicked out when he initially discussed starting a family. Being in charge of a child brought back all these ancient anxieties. We worked for 2 years to reach a point where I felt okay about trying for a baby. 6 months of trying have gone by now. This is now when my mother came back. She simply showed up on my dad's doorway brilliantly and early, like an abandoned child at an orphanage. Not wasting any time, my father allowed her in and summoned Ezra and me in for a family meeting. My mother struck me as a stranger. She wanted to write things and said she was clean. Though Ezra was all for it, I was dubious as heck. It was simpler for him to forgive her as he cannot recall the worst of times she spent doing drugs. I saw it. My mother was my personal hell. Still, my dad urged us to give her some time, which infuriated me. Though I stayed away for their family reunion, I could tell he was eager to see the lady he used to love. Before I left, I hardly spoke a word to my mother. Living with my dad once more, during the last few months, my mother has been working to mend connections with us. She kept her cleanliness, found employment and expressed regret for her actions, but for me it is too little too late. I have been polite, but I cannot regard her as my mother anymore. That dumb fool Ezra wholeheartedly accepted her return. He always talks about the fun they spend together and how wonderful it is to have a mother once more. It triggers my desire to yell. Like he has forgotten all I did for him, all we went through. Boom, my mother was diagnosed, so I tried to pay attention to my life and not worry. Ezra was crying. My father was crying. And I wished I could have been anywhere else but that hospital room. Indeed, Ezra was keen to be a donor when the doctor discussed the complications of dialysis and the large transplant list my mother would have to join. I agreed with his choice, but he hauled me along too when he was checked for compatibility and I turned out to be the ideal fit. Not signing the organ donation form, I hurried out of the hospital right away. Why ought I to sign it? Right now, my father and brother claim I have an unforgiving attitude and a stone heart. Instead, they are rallying around my mother and neglecting me. Although my husband swears he will support me no matter what, I can see he is anxious. He has been excellent through all this. He worries about the surgical hazards and how they might interfere with our intended baby-bearing plans. He also notes how hard I have worked in therapy and doesn't want anything to reverse all that improvement. To add to the craziness, my aunt, Mom's sister, 50F just called tonight. She told me what was a bombshell of sorts. She hasn't forgiven my mother for leaving everyone either. Turns out Mom had been cheating on Dad with a married man and had been pregnant, thus leaving us was not only due in part to drugs. She departed to have the kid and a fresh life, bailing on us once and permanently blaming drug addiction as justification. Though I really don't know how that worked out or why she came back, learning this has opened all the old scars. Mom departed when she had a decision to stay as well as when she abandoned us. I might never run upon a half-sibling out there wherever. I'm still trying to make sense of it. I haven't yet told anyone else in the family about this. Knowing this secret together with all the renal pressure is making me crazy. Thinking about my terrible upbringing and wondering whether I missed some indicators, I stay up all night. I'm wondering every sacrifice I made, every part of my youth I gave up, and how it compares to what I now know about Mom's actual leaving motivation. Ezra is clueless on any of this fresh material. He keeps urging me to donate the kidney, discussing family responsibility and how this could fix everything. But all I can think of is how he got to have a childhood while I was busy parenting him. Dad likewise doesn't know. He seems all soft about Mom once more, and it makes me want to shake him and remind him of all the misery she caused. I am rather conflicted. It almost seems too much to consider having major surgery and forfeiting an organ for someone who decided to drop me. I consider the hazards and how they might skew my odds of becoming pregnant. Already, I have given up so much for this family. My youth, my opportunity to be a normal child, my sense of security. Giving up a bit of my body seems excessive. The villain is me right now. What then, Reddit, is the outcome? Am I the hole for turning down to donate my estranged mother my kidney? Is my attachment to the past excessive? I am the only one who recalls how terrible things actually were and the only one who paid Mom the whole cost for her decisions. This is drowning me with decisions. Every decision seems bad in some capacity. How can I manage this unworkable scenario without totally losing my sanity? Help me right here on Reddit. Update 1. Hi Reddit, I expected no one would interact with this post, hence I intended to delete it 24 hours later. The volume of upvotes and comments this is getting is ridiculous though. I would like to first thank everyone for their opinions on my circumstances. Reading through all of it has given me something to consider. Though I have to be honest, some of the comments urging me to forgive and forget really irritate me. I value those who took the time to grasp my viewpoint. I understand Ephesians 4:32, be kind and compassionate to one another, Forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. Though a great concept, you know what? Sometimes forgiveness is more complicated than a Bible chapter. Not only did my mother's actions affect one day or one week, they molded my whole life. I lost my childhood, my sense of safety, and my faith in the people meant to be watching out for me. You cannot just wipe that with a hug and some kind words. And to all those arguing, but she's your mother. Biology does not always inspire love or respect. Sure, my mother delivered me, but I am the one who had to grow up too quickly and had to be a mother to my younger brother when she cannot be bothered. When she was out high and leaving her children to fend for themselves, where was all this family is everything conversation? Look, I'm not aiming to be resentful or nasty. Despite all she has put me through, I am attempting to safeguard the life I have created. A few of you have mentioned complete family therapy. When she returned first, we tried that. It did not miraculously make everything right. Although my mother said all the right things and shed tears, it did not undo years of struggle and desertion. Many of you have brought out the dangers of kidney donation, and I value that. It goes beyond the procedure itself to include long-term consequences. Suppose I have issues that compromise my capacity for childbearing. What happens if I need kidneys later in life? For someone who didn't give second thought to sacrificing me, am I meant to give my health and maybe my future? My hubby has heard me discuss all of this. He reminded me that I had nothing to owe anyone. Not even my mother, so it's acceptable to give my own well-being top priority. The thought of compromising that for someone who has been more of a stranger than a mother is simply too much. We are still trying for a baby. My family's pressure hasn't let up. Ezra has been text-blowing my phone with messages ranging from extreme rage to guilt-tripping. He even ventured to remark that I would be no better than Mom was when she left us if I let her die. That one hurts. I cannot lie. Dad has been more subdued, but every time we speak he sounds disappointed. They seem to have all forgotten what I went through, what we went through. And then there is my mother. At last she plucked the bravery to give me a straight call. I let it drop off to voicemail. Her message was difficult to hear. She was crying and telling me she is afraid of dying even though she knows she does not deserve my support. Though a large part of me remembered all the times I was terrified and alone due to her choices, part of me wanted to reassure her. Regarding what my aunt revealed regarding Mom's affair and the baby she turned over, I still haven't told anyone. Every time I consider bringing it up, I picture Dad's expression. How it would destroy Ezra's recently discovered relationship with Mom. But hiding this is eating me inside. Carrying the weight of her mistakes, it feels like I am shielding her all over once more. This update most likely makes me sound frigid and merciless. Maybe I am. I am exhausted yet as well. Weary of having to be the one who must be strong and sacrifice-bearing. I want to put myself first for once without feeling bad about it. That's where I am right now. Still conflicted, still aching, still unsure about the correct course of action. Though it means playing the villain in everyone else's life, I am striving to stand my ground and give my own health and happiness top priority. I appreciate it. Still, thank you for listening, Reddit. Though I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, knowing there are individuals out there that understand even just a small bit helps more than you could possibly imagine. Update 2. Sure, Reddit. Though I realize it has only been 2 days, I am here with another update and things have become even more disorganized. Recall how Ezra stated had been blowing my phone? He realized, though, messaging was insufficient. Yesterday he showed up to my residence without warning. While I was at work, my spouse was home finishing some job-related duties. My husband claims Ezra broke into our house yelling about Mom's worsening illness and how the doctors said time was running short. Saying he would pull me to the hospital personally should he have to, he insisted on knowing where I was. Bless him, my husband attempted to cool Ezra down. Ezra wasn't having it, but I was at work and this wasn't the way to handle things. He charged my spouse of poisoning me against Mom, of turning me against my family. Things grew hot, and Ezra actually swung at my husband. Fortunately, my husband avoided it, but he had to physically restrain Ezra to prevent him from ruckling the apartment in search of me. It grew so nasty that one of our neighbors phoned the police. I arrived home exactly as the cops were leaving. Our living room looked like a tornado had hit. My husband had a bruise on his jaw where Ezra had landed a blow. Though Ezra departed when the police arrived, the harm was done. I was startled. I raised a different younger brother here. This was not the child I would have sacrificed all for. It was like viewing the output of a stranger, and a violent one at that. I hoped to gently talk some sense into Ezra when I called him. I raised him not expecting him to be behaving this way. Great error. He grabbed her and began yelling at me. Every name in the book he called me, accusing me of being self-serving and of not thinking about family. Then he said something I will never forget. "I'll never forgive you if Mom dies because of you. You will be dead to me, exactly as you are allowing her to die." I hung there. I was not able to breathe. It seemed as though all of my darkest concerns were realized. Choosing Mom above me, the brother I reared, the one I thought would always have my back, was doing. I disintegrated, full on ugly crying, unable to catch my breath. My husband carried me through it, but I sensed he was also disturbed. We are being pulled apart in general from this. To aggravate things, my dad phoned this morning. Ezra reportedly told him a distorted account of events in our residence. Dad now believes I set my husband on Ezra, that I am the one generating all this conflict. He really had the arrogance to claim that none of this would be happening if I just quit being obstinate and gave the kidney. I vanished. I shared with him all about Mom's infidelity. About the baby she turned over, about her decision to leave us. How it was not only the narcotics. I told him how I had been holding this secret, shielding Mom even now, after everything. I told him it was also his fault and that I'd been furious all my life. On the other side of the line, for what seemed like eternity, there was quiet. I then listened to a sob. I had only seen my dad break down perhaps twice in my lifetime. He continued to apologize, stating he didn't know, he should have been there more. I felt terrible. I would have hurt him all over once again in trying to defend myself. But somewhere else I felt relieved as well. At last, someone else was dragging the weight I had carried all my life. Ezra sent me many texts once we hung up. Dad had contacted him and shared everything. Right now, Ezra's song has totally changed. Apologizing, he said he didn't understand and begged me to pardon him. I'm not sure though, whether I can. I cannot simply ignore the things he said or the way he behaved. Mom has been blowing my phone too. Dad ought to have confronted her about the affair back then as well as the child. Her messages combine calls to understanding with apologies. She is stating she changed and was young and afraid. Young indeed. Dad and brother are still adjusting, looking after her daily. All I can think is, where was this empathy when I was young and terrified? I feel as though I am drowning. Mom's health is declining, Dad's messy, and me? I am merely trying to maintain above water. Not sure what to do going forward. Some of me wants to flee, to vanish as Mom did all those years ago. That is not the solution, but I know. I have too long been gathering the fragments of her errors. I'll create different ones instead. I'm now off from work for some time. To help us to clear our brains, my husband and I are considering a little trip. Except for Dad's, I have blocked every number. I need room to consider what I want and what I need. I'm not sure whether I will ever offer that kidney. Even if I wanted to, the way things are currently makes me not sure I could manage to be in the same room as my family long enough to accomplish it. That brings us to the present situation. The state of my family is disorganized. I'm left wondering if there's any way to sort this mess, or if it's even worth trying, because my brother has exposed a side of himself I never knew existed. I appreciate you paying attention, Reddit. About if I should update once more, I'm unsure. I might even pull the original post. Right now though, I simply have to concentrate on healing. Not only for my mother, but also for me. Final update. Alright Reddit, my last update was some time ago, hence a lot has changed. 3 months following the surgery, I'm writing from home. You did really read correctly. My mom received my kidney donation. Given how fervent I was about not doing it before, I know many of you would find this shocking. I am still processing it personally, believe me. One thing should be clear though, I chose this. Nobody put pressure on me. Not my mom, not even my dad, not Ezra. My spouse and I spent some time away following my last update and discussed it. We leased a cabin in the mountains, no cell service, no internet, just us, nature and lots of time to reflect. Although I kept having nightmares and knew I would never forgive myself if I did not at least try to help, being away from the turmoil helped clear my thoughts. The idea of my mother dying and of having that on my conscience was intolerable. I came to see that I was furious at the world, at the unfairness of it all, not just at my mother. And clinging to that rage was causing more damage than anyone else could have. I told my spouse my choice when we returned. Though concerned, he was also encouraging. We visited with the doctors, gathered all the data, and began the process. I will not lie, it was not simple. The operation was difficult, and the healing was more so. You know what though? I have not come to regret it. Not because it instantly corrected everything. Rather, I feel at peace with myself for the first time in years. I ran across my mother before they wheeled us in on the day of the procedure. She was weeping and repeatedly thanking me. I told her the truth, that I was acting for me as much as for her. I could not forget, I'd just forgiven her. I hoped she would recover, but I saw no future in which we would live near together. Though she understood, that wasn't what she wanted to hear. Though some things are better left unknown, I wanted to question her about my sister. We hugged, a true hug, not the uncomfortable ones we had exchanged since she returned. In several respects, it felt like a farewell. I am rebuilding our friendship with Ezra. He sincerely apologizes for his actions. Though sluggish, it's an improvement nonetheless. He is beginning to see the sacrifices I made and recognizing that his recollections of our childhood don't tell the complete picture. Parents, Dad. Dad has been right by everyone's side during all of this. He is also juggling his own shame and regrets. We now find ourselves getting closer in a manner not seen in years. He shares with me his pride in me, not only for the gift but also for the person I have grown to be despite all. She has been amazing. From the choice until the rehabilitation, he was there at every stage. We have a closer relationship than ever. Regarding myself, I am healing in several different ways. Though the physical rehabilitation has not been simple, the emotional weight I have carried for years seems less. Not foolish enough to believe everything is wonderful right now. My gloomy days and my periods of uncertainty still exist. Still, I'm glad of myself for choosing to be true to who I am, not someone else wanted me to be. To each of you who helped me along this road, thank you. Your comments and your understanding meant more than you could possibly know. Remember, forgiveness is personal and healing is not straightforward. Reddit.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.